Hello, and welcome to the joint RGI and ENTSO-E conference, Adaptation and Resilience, ensuring the energy transition is built on resilient infrastructure. Welcome to all of you online today and to our speakers here in the ENTSO-E studio. My name is Sonya Twohig, and I am the Secretary General of ENTSO-E. I am happy to co-host this event today with the CEO of RGI, Antonella Battaglini. Good morning, Antonella. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Sonya, and welcome also from my side to everybody. Climate science is very clear. The impacts will be more frequent and more severe, and therefore we need to plan energy infrastructure such to stand what is coming. And that's why we are here together today. And we are going to talk exclusively today about physical impact on energy infrastructure and not all the other impacts that climate change will bring. So I hope you will have fun staying with us.
Yes, climate change does have a significant impact on infrastructure. So we do need to ensure that the grid planners, that policymakers have the best possible understanding of what exactly those impacts are. Of course, the related effects and also the solutions. So today is all about solutions as well as the effects. Only then can we develop the mitigations or the strategies to help the climate change and manage our critical infrastructure. For today's conference, this means we look mostly at the physical infrastructure and the impacts upon it, and how we can keep it strong and resilient going forward. Antonella.
Yes, well, RGI has been working closely with ENTSO-E for many years. And of course, this collaboration will continue because ENTSO-E is the body who is planning the energy infrastructure for Europe for the next decades. And therefore, they are the ones that will find the solution to deal with the challenges ahead. But let me talk a bit, who are we, RGI, Renewables Grid Initiative? Renewables Grid Initiative is an association of transmission system operators and environmental NGOs, climate NGOs from across Europe. We have been set up in 2009 to actually together support and inspire the build-up of the electricity grid that is needed to enable full decarbonization and therefore fighting climate change. In the course of the years, our association has grown. What you see on the screen are the logos of our members. And since a couple of years, we have also welcomed supporting organizations. Currently, we have 2, and we are very proud to have them. RGI work is based on 3 main pillars. We deal with the technical area, so what is the need for grids, how do we plan for that, and how do we make sure that this is built in time. But at the same moment, we also have an environmental component because every infrastructure that is built actually can bring damages to nature. And so how do we build this massive amount of energy infrastructure, not only protecting nature, but also using it to potentially bring benefits to nature, some restoration activities are indeed possible. And finally, a social dimension, because this massive energy transformation that we are going through cannot happen without the support of the people. And getting public support is essential if we want to achieve these massive changes in time. And so the RGI continues to be a unique initiative, not only in Europe, but around the world. And I'm very happy again that we can work together with ENTSO-E.
Thank you, Antonella. And maybe a word now about ENTSO-E. ENTSO-E, as you know, is the 39 TSOs across Europe working in the world's largest interconnected grid. ENTSO-E's mission is to support our TSOs in keeping the lights on in the European electricity system. To this end, we are in charge of planning the system needs, taking into account a wide range of factors. And now, of course, grid resilience, especially in the last year with the very difficult system with regard to adequacy, is one of the cornerstones of ENTSO-E's own product, which is called the System Outlooks. And today you will hear from our ENTSO-E colleagues with regard to the seasonal outlooks, which is short-term, from mid-term, which is the European Resource Adequacy Assessment, and of course our longer-term perspective, which is looking at the TYNDP. We continuously investigate the ability of the European power grid to withstand disruptive events, including forced outages of plants or lines, but also extreme weather. And today, we talked a number of good solutions there to look at extreme weather events. We achieve all of this together with our cooperation with our TSOs. Of course, together with our stakeholders, we develop the methodologies, the complex building models, and we support overall the future grid that we wish to build together. On my next slide, you will see, of course, our vision. We have recently published a power system for a carbon-neutral Europe. You will find it also on our website today. There are 4 key building blocks. And a key building block, of course, is infrastructure itself. And of course, today we want to ensure and highlight the elements around physical infrastructure and grid resilience to that. So, Antonella, we look like we're having a good program for today. Maybe you could take us through the agenda. Thank you.
Sure. So we started with 2 keynotes. The purpose of the keynotes is to really put everyone on the same page, understanding what we are talking about. The first panel then will concentrate on what is happening right now, what is the perception and the knowledge of the different energy actors when it comes to climate change impacts on infrastructure. Then we will have a lunch break. Lunch is offered only for those who are here. For all of you online, you have to get organized by yourself. And in the afternoon, we reconvene for a series of best practices, because indeed, there are already some practices that are very valuable and may be inspirational for many. And then we follow with the second panel, where we look at a bit into the future. So what we need to do, how do we plan the grid such that we are really ready for what is coming. And that will be close to the end, when Sonya and I will reconvene here to do a quick sum up and close the day. So I think we are ready to start. Mm-hmm. And let me introduce you my dear colleague, Stephanie Beccia, who is going to be with us for the entire event. And she will be the moderator for the day. Stephanie, please join us on stage.
Good morning and welcome also from my side. I'm Stephanie Beccia. I'm the Program Manager for Communication at the Renewables Grid Initiative, and I will be your host for today. A very quick thing to add to the welcome, and thank you to Antonella and Sonya for this great introduction to the event. Just a clarification that when we speak about energy infrastructure in the context of this event, we mainly refer to transmission and distribution grids, as well as wind and solar. But back to the program. And to set the scene for the discussions of the day, we will kick off the official program now with our keynote session. And we have 2 incredible keynote speakers for you today. The first of which is Swenja Surminski, who joins us as Managing Director for Climate and Sustainability at Marsh, McLennan, as well as Professor in Practice at the Grantham Research Institute of the London School of Economics. And on top of that, she's also a member of the Adaptation Committee of the UK Committee on Climate Change. Thanks a lot. Thanks to her and her research, she has a broad overview of current and expected impacts of climate change on energy infrastructure and its operation. So actually the perfect input to feed into today's discussions. So what do experts' projections tell us on that subject? Swenja, thanks a lot for being here, and please share your insights with us.
Hello, my name is Sonya. I'm very happy to be here. And first of all, a big thank you to ENTSO-E and RGI for this incredible event. I'm really excited to be here in Brussels. It's a bit wet, but we are all resilient. We all managed to get here. And we actually all managed to get here because obviously the energy system worked very well. And I was just reflecting on basically from the first moment I woke up this morning till I got here and talking to you now, how dependent I am and everybody else is and all our systems are on resilient energy infrastructure and systems. So what I'm going to do here is give you a bit of a flavor of what we currently know about climate impacts, but also I don't really want to be sort of admiring a problem. It's also about, what can we do about it? And that's where I really welcome this initiative that RGI and ENTSO-E have started. And I really look forward to further discussing this with you. So my background is in climate science, but I work now with Marsh McLennan, which is a global insurance, broking and risk management firm, with colleagues all across the world engaging to help different sectors, government, industry, to address risk and to manage risk and to become more resilient. So I'll share a few insights here. And maybe a bit of a note of caution. Nobody needs to be a climate scientist to actually address climate resilience and adaptation. I think what is important is that we understand the science and we understand the models and the tools that are available. And there's an incredible amount of tools and information and data available. On the slide, you just see a quick reflection on some of the recent literature sort of segmented by sector, and you sort of see that there is out there a lot of material that can be used. I underline can be used because are we using it? Are we actually able to translate science into decision making? And I think this is still a big challenge, and I think this is where events such as this can actually also help. The complex web of climate impacts. I think it's really important to understand that when we talk about the physical impacts of climate change, it's not one-dimensional and it's not one impact. There are actually a lot of them. And unfortunately, they're also interdependent. Just to give you an example, droughts and floods, they interact, they are related. So you can be in a location, 2 weeks of really heavy rain that follows a long period of drought. And, they reinforce each other. So when we talk about climate impacts, it's really important to understand that this is not about, a single issue. It's complex, and we need to understand the interdependencies. And this becomes then even more important when we talk about the different, touch points with systems such as the energy system. I think it's important to also understand, particularly when we talk about energy, how this actually interlinks with a lot of other issues that we are all facing. I mean, we are just basically living what I often describe as the trilemma of the energy system. So we need to be sustainable and renewable. We need to be affordable and secure and reliable. And getting all that together, is obviously hugely challenging. But a lot, there's big expectations that the energy systems are sort of preparing for that and can handle this. And on this slide, you see the Global Risk Report, which comes out every year and just sort of highlights what business policy, but also scientists sort of think about key issues that are facing the world right now and that are going to be important for us to deal with. And when you look at that from a sort of energy systems perspective, you see suddenly, there are quite a few things that are interwoven and that are sort of facing us at the same time. So it's really important to understand also these interdependencies. So, when you hear climate impacts, you often think, well, we're talking about, the next 50 years, 100 years. No, climate change is already here. It's already having an impact. And we know from the science that it is not going to get any easier. The impacts are increasing. It obviously depends how successful we are in our efforts to mitigate climate change. But what we see, the sort of impact, for example, when you think back to last year, the heat and drought period that we faced here in Europe, that is already exposing where the vulnerabilities in our systems are. And on this slide, you see a few examples there from various countries where these risks are already material, where we are already exposed to these impacts. But we also obviously need to understand what the trends are. And, in order to prepare, in order to take action early, we need to understand, what the outlook is. So I shared here a few examples from some research that we are doing at Marsh McLennan, specifically around flood, but also more widely, there is material out there from other providers. There are some reports, there is the International Energy Agency has done some analysis on this. And I think as a first sort of piece of advice, I think it's really to familiarize ourselves with what is out there. And then to sort of start taking this into account and consider, what does this mean for my particular location? What does this mean for the systems that I'm involved in? What does this mean for my customers who are dependent on my services? So I think that's really kind of the first step. And as you can see here, there is a range of sort of physical climate impacts. And the projections in terms of how these develop, that depends heavily on how successful we are in terms of climate change. So you can see here different projections depending on whether we're looking at a 2-degree warming or a 3.5-degree warming. And in my engagement, also with businesses and with governments, I think it's really important that we have, that we understand how this effort to build adaptation and resilience also connects into our efforts to actually, become net zero and reduce emissions. And I usually start these conversations with saying we will not achieve net zero without adaptation and without resilience. And I give you a few examples how this can play out or where this is already visible. I said there are quite a few different types of hazards, particularly relevant here in Europe. Risk of fires is relatively low compared to other areas of the world. But again, we need to understand the interdependencies. A long period of really dry weather, a heat wave, is causing now forest fires in areas that were really unfamiliar with it, and can often also impact, the energy infrastructure that is in those areas. I think, it helps to try and picture this in terms of, where you are, the geographical location, but asset where you are is one piece. Obviously you are dependent on inputs from various other places, and your input into the system, also spreads across. So I think a geographical understanding of, how these different types of hazards play out is really important. And again, there are useful tools available that help us understand, and where we have actually now really good data sets that also create some maps that can then help when we make investment decisions, when we make planning decisions, to actually ensure that we take climate change into account. I mentioned already this notion of a trilemma. And Marsh McLennan has had a long-standing engagement with the World Energy Council, and where we produced these reports, the Trilemma report, which really looks at this interchange between, affordability, availability and security, and then also sustainability of energy. And I think this sort of highlights how, what we don't need is a silo solution. We actually need an integrated approach to that. And yes, there are also likely to be some trade-offs. One area where trade-offs are probably already visible is in the context of hydropower. So a lot of countries around the world are sort of building their future energy strategy, their net zero strategy, on hydropower. At the same time, we know that in a lot of parts of the world, hydropower is going to be under immense stress and is already under stress. So what this implies is, are we taking that information into account? Are we sort of building or basically investing in the infrastructure now with the view to address current risk, but also future risk? And I think this is a really crucial topic because there are massive investment flows going into, decarbonization of energy systems. But if we don't do this with at the same time considering also the resilience of these energy systems, we are creating a lot of future cost, and we actually would be locking ourselves into a not very resilient future. And this is where this information, the data, the science, the input can actually help decision makers. So I said I wouldn't really talk just about admiring the problem, because the good news is there are also a lot of solutions already in play. And across the world, there are really good case studies where also different parts, not just, the sort of grid side, but also, the asset owners, but also those who depend on reliable energy systems, sort of come together and start addressing these challenges. And I think that is actually also a really important message. This is not just, a very sort of worrying scenario. No, this is something that we can address now and that we are also starting to see being addressed. And there's also a financial element in this, where sort of investors are certainly also starting to not just wanting to understand, asking to disclose that information, but they also want to understand what's being done and how resilient is, that particular system that I'm investing in. My company has been sort of supporting this with various pieces of research. I mentioned the Trilemma, and I think it's helpful to try and pull together, the science and then also the sort of practical applications. And that's basically a translation exercise, and that also motivated me, given my science background, to now work in the private sector and work with our clients to support them. There is a lot of material that can also help these conversations. And I think it really also helps to then reflect when we say infrastructure and complexity, what does this mean? And sometimes, translating this into easily understandable numbers, as you can see on this slide, the current exposure of power infrastructure around the world to flood risk. That is quite dramatic when you consider how that's also likely to increase unless we start becoming more adapted and more resilient. And these messages are also very useful to then take into policymakers when we talk about, the principles that should guide adaptation strategies. And I highlight here 3 principles that we use in our engagement with business, with infrastructure owners, but also governments. And I think there are some bold steps that we can all take. Regulation needs to play a part, finance and insurance also needs to take a part, but it also really needs to understand that we take into account the climate science and use that. And with that, I just wanted to leave you with a bit of a plug. As it was mentioned earlier, I'm also a member of the UK Committee on Climate Change. And just last week, we launched the first report that actually looks at net zero and climate resilience together in the context of a decarbonized power system. So you can find this online. I think this might give you actually some inspiration and maybe assist you with the further discussion. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the session.
Thanks a lot, Swenja, for this very insightful overview. Thank you so much for being here. We now have a broad idea of what climate change and related extreme weather might mean for energy infrastructure in the medium and long term. But what does this mean? What do we do? How do we adapt? How do we make our energy infrastructure more resilient? And what do we even mean when we talk about adaptation and resilience? What do these concepts mean? To make sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to the concepts we're discussing today, we have invited our second keynote speaker of the day, Malin Goetemann, to answer these questions for us. Malin is a senior lecturer and associate professor at the Department of Electrical Engineering at Uppsala University, and her research looks into resilience of offshore renewables to extreme weather events. Malin, we really look forward to hearing from you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, so thanks for inviting me. And although I'm not physically in Brussels, I'm in Uppsala in Sweden, and it's pretty wet here today as well. We had beautiful snow on the weekend, but now it's raining. So as said, my name is Malin Goetemann, and I'm from Department of Electrical Engineering at Uppsala University in Sweden. And I'm also part of two research centers, Stand Up for Energy and Center for Natural Hazards and Disaster Science. And today I will talk about adaptation and resilience. What do we mean by these concepts, and why are they of particular relevance today? So to start, we'll start with the definition of resilience. And I say the definition as if there was one definition. In reality, there are hundreds of definitions depending on the context and the system in consideration and who you ask. But let's start from one, from the International Energy Agency. Resilience is the capacity of the energy system and its components to cope with a hazardous event or trend, to respond in ways that maintain its essential functions, identity and structure, as well as its capacity for adaptation, learning and transformation. It encompasses the following concepts: robustness, resourcefulness, and recovery. So in this definition, we see some key concepts: cope with a hazardous event, maintain its essential functions, and also capacity for adaptation. So here we see the word adaptation, learning and transformation. And it includes robustness, resourcefulness, and recovery. So this definition describes a system which is dynamical and is able to bounce back from a disturbance. And adaptation here means that this system is able to change in behavior or function in response to modified surroundings or emerging threats. And there are also other concepts out there that we use to describe properties of energy systems that I would like to compare resilience to. So we have energy security, robustness, resistance, and many others. These are just a few of them. So if we start with energy security, traditionally it meant the uninterrupted supply of oil, but since it has been given a more broad definition, so in essence it means the ability to meet the demand at a reasonable price. And it differs from resilience in that resilience is a more holistic and agile concept. It explicitly covers also the bouncing back behavior. We have robustness and the two similar concepts, resistance and stability. So robustness, the ability to withstand stress without losing its system functionality, we saw in the definition was included as a component within resilience. Vulnerability can be seen as an antonym to robustness, so it's the exposure to hazards. So if a system has a low vulnerability to a certain hazard, it has a high robustness to that hazard. And resilience is often described in terms of the so-called resilience curve, which can be criticized, but it's also a useful tool. So it describes the system performance as a function of time. So if we have a low vulnerability or high robustness, that means that the system will not be as disturbed as if it would be if it was highly vulnerable. So this resilience curve has two main phases. The first one is the disruption or absorption phase, and the second one is the restoration phase. So if we have a system with a low vulnerability, then we have a higher resilience. And we can also improve the resilience by improving the recovery or response. And then we have reliability, which typically focuses more on high probability events, where we can use probability density functions and compute average disruption indices. And resilience differs because it can also cover extreme events, unprecedented events, unexpected events for which we don't have this data. And then we have sustainability, which can be defined as the capability of being maintained. And it differs from resilience. It's usually used in the context of climate or environment or ecology, and it has a much longer time scale. So we talk about sustainability for future generations, whereas resilience typically cover the time scale just before, during, and after a disturbance or an event. Okay, so with all these concepts that are all useful and are all still used, why are we talking so much about resilience today? Why has resilience gained such increasing attention in the last decade or so? So I will answer that question by posing another question. How well can we predict the unknown? Or how well can we predict the future? And I will give some quotes. President of a bank to Henry Ford's lawyer, "The horse is here to stay, but the automobile is only a novelty, a fad." Junius Morgan to his son who wanted Thomas Edison to install electricity in his house, "Electricity is just a fad." Albert Einstein, "There is not the slightest indication that nuclear energy will ever be obtainable. It would mean that the atom would have to be shattered at will." Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM, "I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers." Ken Olson, president of the Digital Equipment Corporation, "There's no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home." Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, "There's no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share." No chance. And finally, the International Energy Agency, in their World Energy Outlook, where they make projections for installations of renewable energy. So this is their projection from 2002, which they had to revise. This is the one from 2006, and this is the one from 2010. And the black line shows the actual installations. So the prediction that they made for 2030 was met already in 2010. And none of these projections or quotes were wrong. They were based on existing knowledge and policies at the time. But my main message here is that it is very difficult to predict the future of very complex and dynamical systems. And as you all know, the energy system and the societal use of the energy system are very complex and dynamical systems. So as you all know, a stable electricity supply is absolutely critical to the functioning of the society. All critical infrastructures are dependent on a stable electricity supply. We have food supply, water supply, finance, information and communication, etc. So energy resilience or electricity resilience is not just a technical question. It's a socio-technical challenge. It's a question of social stability, of national security, economic development, of human lives. And these systems, the energy system and the societal dependence on it, are under a rapid transformation. So we have electrification and digitalization, profoundly changing how we use electricity. And we also have transformations going on in the energy system with installations of intermittent renewable energy sources, increasing the complexity. So with these changes going on, we might not foresee all emerging vulnerabilities and protect against all future threats. So that is why, in the words of Brian Walker, the point is to build systems that will be safe when they fail, not to try to build fail-safe systems. Of course, we should also try to make our physical assets and societal dependence on them as robust as possible to all the threats and vulnerabilities that we can foresee. But we have to acknowledge that there are uncertainties and we have to prepare to those. Okay, but so far I have only talked about resilience as if this would be an inherent property of a system. And to a certain degree it can be, but we can have systems that are resilient to some threats, but not to others. And more importantly, increasing the resilience to some threats might reduce it to others. So when we talk about resilience, we also have to talk about the threats or the hazards that we see. So what are the different threats? Well, we have natural threats, extreme weather events that we have heard a lot about in the previous keynote as well. And we have geological threats, tsunamis, earthquakes. We have space weather events. We have malicious threats, crime-related, hostile attacks, geopolitical events. These two pictures show the Nord Stream pipeline leakage and the Ukraine power grid that was under digital attacks. We have accidental threats, equipment failure and human factor, and we also have systemic threats arising from system transformations or independencies within or between systems. And among these, extreme weather events are responsible for most disruptions in the electricity supply. But my main takeaway here is that this threat landscape is changing. So as we heard in the previous keynote, we can expect that the extreme weather events will change due to climate change. We can also expect that malicious threats will change, both due to changes in the geopolitical landscape, but also due to the enabled attack surface through digitalization and electrification. And we have already talked about the system transformations and interdependencies, so we can expect that this threat landscape is changing as well. So in total, we have energy system and in particular electricity systems that are changing. We have societal dependencies on those that are changing, and we have threat landscapes that are changing. So the uncertainties are very large. So from this, we might expect that we can see an increased frequency and also an increased severity of the disruptions because we are increasingly dependent on a stable electricity supply. So with this in mind, what can we do? So far, it sounds in my talk like we don't know anything and we can't do anything, and that is of course not true. We know a lot and we can do a lot, and this day is dedicated to that. So we will hear a lot about best practices and discussions around that later today. And I will talk a little bit more about some future directions. And for that, let's go back to the definition that we started off with. So here we have the words that we have to work with. Cope with the hazardous event to maintain essential functions. Adaptation, learning, and transformation. Robustness, resourcefulness, and recovery. And to understand what we have to do, we continuously have to analyze how is the system, when with system I mean the electricity system and energy system in general, and the societal dependence on them, and the threat landscapes, how are they changing? What new vulnerabilities do we see emerging, or old vulnerabilities that can be exploited by new threats? And how do we best adapt and mitigate to those? And this has to be a continuous and iterative process. And it has to involve stakeholders across society. And an event like this today is a perfect example how we can hold these discussions. Some words on robustness and resourcefulness. We have to keep in mind that we might not find a solution that fits all. So we need to keep a holistic perspective. And we have to focus both on structural robustness and resilience and the physical assets, and also operational resilience. And two examples of where we have to keep a wide perspective. For instance, if we just focus on hardening the system by undergrounding transmission lines, for instance, then we will probably increase the robustness to windstorms, but we might also reduce the robustness to earthquakes or floodings. And if we blindly just increase the monitoring and control abilities to improve demand side load management during disruptions, then we might increase vulnerabilities to because of interdependencies or because of digital attacks and attack surfaces. So we need to keep a broad perspective. And some words on adaptation and also recovery. We are all interconnected. So in Europe and the electricity system and the energy system. So we have to work interdisciplinary, cross-border, and cross-sectors to develop our adaptation plans and risk management and emergency plans. One example of this is, for instance, water cooling processes that will see changes due to climate change, and that affects both the electricity system, for instance, cooling nuclear power plants and other heat-producing power plants, but it also affects many other sectors. And ENTSO-E and Renewables Grid Initiative and also other actors that are here today, they have vital roles to play in this, together with other stakeholders and researchers in society. So with that said, I really look forward to the discussions today, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Malin. Incredible, useful guidance to set up the discussions of the day, I would say. So thanks again to you and to Swenja as well for these great keynotes that kicked off our day today. And thanks also for telling us that we're not entirely lost, that there is still a chance to act if we do so now. And now actually that we do have an overview of what the challenges and the issues and the concepts that we will be discussing today are, let's actually start doing just that and kick off with our first panel discussion. Our first panel will start in a second. I think we have a quick intro for this. Our first panel will look into how actors across sectors of the energy world have experienced climate change threats to their assets and how they consider them within their particular field of work. How present is the topic for them? Which relevance does it have? Which needs do they connect to it? And with whom do they exchange on it? Our moderator for the panel, Noemi Szabo, policy manager at ENTSO-E, will discuss all of this and more with our panel. But before I actually hand over to Noemi, I want to share with all of you how you as the audience at home and in your offices can engage with us today and specifically with our panelists today. So you're very welcome to share all of your questions, all of your insights into the topic via Slido, which you should all be able to see on your screens. So you can start asking questions right away. Slido should be open. And if you share many questions with us as soon as the Q&A starts, we will be able to throw them towards Noemi. So don't be shy and start asking right away. We will have a little bit of a panel-only discussion at the beginning, but don't worry, your questions will come into play towards the end of the panel. And in case we don't get to answer all the questions during the panel today, we will try to follow up with this after the event and make sure that you all get your answers. But now, let's hear from the panelists. And they are Craig Hart, Energy Analyst in the System Integration of Renewables Unit at the International Energy Agency. Marcel Lenzin, Head of Grid Delivery at Swiss Transmission System Operator Swissgrid, and Louise Rula, Head of Distribution and Market Facilitation at Eurelectric. We are missing in our panel today Alessia De Vita, who is well, there's a small emergency, so she's not able to join today. But I'm sure we will still have an extremely interesting panel today. And for this, I hand over to Noemi now.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Stephanie, for the welcoming words and introductions. So welcome to you all, also to our audience today. Thank you for joining online. Today I have the pleasure to share the panel with great speakers representing relevant sectors. So as we could hear from the introduction presentation, the distribution, the transmission sector, as well as the agency, International Energy Agency, really important outputs for the topic today. Definitely, before kicking off the discussion, I would like to encourage our audience to use the Slido in order to engage with us and try to raise their own questions, and we will make sure to address as much as we can from them. So without any further ado, I would like to start the discussion by, of course, saying that the topic of our panel is definitely to consider all these challenging elements and that the climate change is putting on how we are going to address the infrastructure planning and the operation of the electricity grid, as well as how we are going to address resilience and adaptation for all these threats and physical challenges that we have in terms of ensuring security of supply and so on. So I would like to start by, just giving the opportunity to each of you to share some of the insights from your experience in terms of what are the challenges that you encountered from the climate change perspective, and how this is impacting the sector, and how do you think that this can be better reflected. But overall, it would be great to have your initial views on identifying these challenges from your perspective. So I will start with you, Craig, and maybe you would give us some insights from International Energy Agency perspective, as well, as I know that you are providing a lot of insightful data that we are definitely using and consulting all the time.
Yes, thanks for the question. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I would say that when it comes to resilience of electricity infrastructure, this is becoming obviously more and more important. Everything is electrifying. I think it's quite clear that it will electrify even further. We have various end uses which before were, coming from maybe, let's say, gas for heating or oil for transport, and these things will become electrified. And so as a result, our dependency on electricity is going to be increasing. So what this means is that we really do need electricity security to ensure that our day-to-day lives as a modern economy, as a modern civilization, basically, basically function correctly. And so what does it mean then to be resilient? Well, the electricity system is not like other systems in that we have these systems that are very spread out. You have more distributed resources, a large footprint. The grid is very exposed to risks, be it climate risks, and of course these climate risks at the same time as we're doing this transition to renewable electricity, to renewable energy. These risks are changing, and so our understanding of these risks is very important to understand. So I think it's quite important to have this develop this understanding of what the risks are, develop an understanding of what will be impacted. The electricity is not just the grid, but it's the entire value chain going from fuel supply in some cases. Of course, we're talking about renewable energy here, so maybe it's then going into the supply of critical minerals to build inverters, or rare earth metals to build for magnets for wind turbines. These things all play a role in how we then want to develop our future power systems. And so what happens then if some of these sort of components are impacted and we're not ready for it? And I think this is really the main challenge when it comes to trying to develop resilient power systems, resilient electricity systems. And then, of course, and then as this develops, I mean, we obviously know that it can, that our dependency on electricity, as this develops further, the impacts of any, let's say, disruption and not being resilient will have greater impacts. It's not just, I mean, if you don't have heating in the winter because of blackouts, that can be life-threatening and not just a minor inconvenience. So I think this is really maybe a way of like looking at it, how our resilience changes in terms of how it affects us from just being a minor inconvenience, as maybe it was, to something which is very impactful in terms of its impact on society.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very interesting and important points that you raised around resilience here, which is definitely very important and one of the main topics that we were looking to tackle today. Now I will look to you, Louise, and turn to your experience, because I know that from your electric perspective you have a lot of distribution side and generator members. So maybe you could share some of your insights in terms of the challenges that climate change challenges that were identified in how the infrastructure and the power system is working practically.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. I think the last years, the power industry has really focused its efforts to mitigation, climate change mitigations. But climate mitigations and climate adaptation are two sides of the same coin. So it's extremely important for the power industry now also to look at strategies and common actually answer for adapting to climate change. We also heard from the keynotes that unfortunately, despite all the efforts we can do, there will still be impact on the power industry. So what we see now among all the companies that Eurelectric represents from the power industry is that every power asset will be impacted and in an increasing manner with the extreme weather events. So all the businesses have to somehow internalize this in their decision making for investments. There are some companies that are already taking some initiative, such as very integrated strategies to limit the risk from climate change. I have an examples of Enegrid, which is the Italian DSOs. They have what we call 4R strategies, which is a set of very concrete measures to tackle risk prevention, also readiness, response and recovery. And this is, I think, the way to move forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your interesting points. And I'm looking now at the TSO perspective. Welcome, Marcel. And would you be able to share with us from your experience some insights of the challenges that you encounter?
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here, Noemi. Yes. We operate the transmission grid in Switzerland as Swiss Grid, and as a mountainous country, of course, we face a lot of these challenges already today. So we have issues with rockfalls, we have sliding landscapes, We have also forest fires. So all those challenges and threats are challenging us. And if we see this is going to be more and more, of course, we need to be prepared for that. And from an operating perspective, for us, it's important to know those threats and also think about measures. Measures sometimes are limited. If you have big rock falls, for example, the energy is too high to just build some protection. So this is not going to help us. So in this case, we just need to be prepared for any damage. So that's an important point for us. Also have the BCM procedures in place to be fast on reparation if any damage happens. We cannot evacuate, so all we can do is we can reroute our lines if we see the threat is too high. And if we, of course, build new lines, then we take all those threats into account for the planning and to be as resilient as possible. And of course, also the network as such, which also needs to be operated in a N-1 situation, so you can cope with some damages. We, of course, hope they are very limited. So that's the challenges we face.
Yeah, many thanks for raising also the point on the physical infrastructure and how you are looking at it from a TSO perspective. I think that this is really important in terms of sharing practices or how we can also look at that from a solution perspective that we will be addressing a little bit further. Now I'm looking again at you, Craig, and I'm thinking about how research and data assessment can help us to improve and to integrate better this visibility of the challenges that we have in our planning of the grid, how we operate the grid as well, but generally how we can prepare better to use the data. I think that this was also one of the points that were raised in a keynote speech. So from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think one of the recommendations of our recent reports, and when we're looking at climate resilience of power systems or energy systems in general, is this idea of readiness. So being able to be doing climate impact assessments, looking at the potential risks to your infrastructure, because of course before you can make your systems resilient, and of course we had the definitions before of resilience being so being able to withstand the impact, being able to navigate any disruption caused by the impact, and obviously then recovery. But before that, you have to have the system being ready. And this idea of readiness, which I would also is something, a definition that we use at the IEA for resilience, is quite important. So doing the impact assessments, mainstreaming the idea of resilience so that you have national energy strategies and which then filter down to even more local levels and to the actual utilities as well, so that they're making ensuring that this infrastructure is resilient. So I think the idea of converting the science as the climate science and ensuring that this filters down to actual tangible resilience for the system against what the climate may be. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty to the climate science. Of course, there's, and this is something which needs to be built into it. So this constant revision of these strategies and of the impact assessments, seeing what works when you actually are implementing certain resilient measures. So certain adaptation measures, what was the impact of that? And can we do maybe do it better in the future? I've got one example that comes to mind is that so a lot of the time, so you have the impact assessment on let's say the grid, and you one of the things is this physical hardening of infrastructure, so undergrounding cables. But now, for example, in France last year, there was a case of there being heat waves that caused these cables to overheat, and so it led to outages. Mm-hmm. So now it's not just about undergrounding cables, but it's undergrounding cables while making sure that they can withstand higher temperatures. And so this is like the reevaluation of your sort of your risks to the infrastructure. It's not just the exposure to the elements, but it's now also this increasing heat. And so this is really the need for having these impact assessments, and then of course putting it into policies that filter down to the utilities and this constant revision of it. And I think this is also quite important. The idea of re-evaluation after, not a considerable amount of time, but very often. I would say, all the time, in fact. And so I think this idea of readiness and re-evaluation is quite important.
Yeah. So I'm thinking now, as you made really important points about re-evaluation, impact assessment, how we look at, heating. We have these weather extremes that we could see, like in climate change, changing temperatures, going to the extremes, heat waves, and so on. So I'm thinking now from a grid perspective with the TSOs, actually, Marcel, how do you think these points could improve maybe the way in which we can encourage the resilience of the physical grid? Actually, are you considering this type of data as well, and impact assessment when you are looking at how to better? I wouldn't use predict, actually, because we cannot, but definitely try to prepare for this kind of challenges.
Yeah, for sure, especially if it comes to building new lines, which we have to do a lot. Of course, we take all these factors into account. We try to predict it. We try to find routes where we don't face those threats, and also build the infrastructure in a way that it resists those threats. So that's important factors we take into account when we plan new lines. And we need new lines, and a lot of new lines, also due to the change of the energy strategy when it comes to renewable integration. And for us, also a big challenge in this area is the whole approval procedure. We see our lead time to build new lines is far too long. We are not following the pace of the production of the renewables, and the network is lacking behind, and that's a big challenge we see, and we need to speed up when it comes to approval procedure and also obligation procedures and also to see the project in one. If investors plan for renewables, for example, in renewables plants, it's important to also take the network into account and to plan it as a whole to be ready in once. Otherwise, it doesn't help the system.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very interesting perspective to see how we can address this from a TSO perspective. And now looking at the TSO, exactly, Louise, to you, from your experience with the members, did they highlight any kind of specific life challenge that they have encountered through the climate change, and what is this bringing in terms of practical threats? So if you could share some of the experience, there could be relevant for us then to understand what we could do as well better in the future.
Yeah, exactly. I can present two concrete examples. The first one happened in 2017 in Italy with heavy snow episode where which disconnected more than 100,000 customers, and there was also entire cities that were completely, let's say, disconnected from the rest of Italy. One of the first, let's say, challenges was obviously to restore and to get back to a normal situation. But one of the lessons learned from that comes from the national regulatory perspective. The Italian regulator has decided and requires DSOs to implement a 3-year investment plans to look at different solutions and look at different options for replying quickly in different situations. Case of snow, heat waves, but also windstorm treefall. So a cost-benefit analysis is being performed following some guidelines that are approved by the regulators. This is one way at least to improve. A second example happened in UK. It was a succession of storms, end of 2021, early 2022, with Eunice, Franklin, and the third one I'm missing, Artvin, I think, which has disconnected over 1 million households. And here, a very good lesson learned was about the mutual aid at region levels to really, and so cooperation is the second very important element here in resilience. How can we better cooperate between obviously DSOs, TSOs, but also different sectors, because this is not only impacting the power sector, but also, for instance, telecoms, transport. So there's a very strong need for cooperation between the different sectors.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for raising the next point, actually, in terms of how we can address these challenges. I'm again looking at you in terms of your experiences. How do you think that we can address this? And Craig, I think that Louise mentioned a lot cooperation on different sectors, cross sectors, and technologies as well. So, what do you think about this way of addressing them? And if you have any kind of other, recommendations in this sense, maybe that could be also interesting to learn more of what we could think of.
So I think, and it's a good point, and I think Marcel also touched on it earlier about this idea of like integrated planning, like intersectoral sort of linkages, and how this is so important to resilience. So, for example, when you have a sort of big, let's say, extreme weather event, and this is really one of the major sort of climate impacts that we're seeing on our grids or our power systems today, and we're kind of seeing that a lot of there's obviously all these components. There's the idea of being able to withstand the impact, and then to obviously when you have the outages to continue to operate. But then you have this recovery process, and within this recovery process, there are so many factors and different sectors at play. You have the idea that you have to coordinate the recovery process, so the communications. So if these are knocked down by cyclone or floods, this becomes a big challenge that you need to. So you need to have sort of a resilient communication system. When you have the idea of having to then go and do reparations on the power system, you need to have access to to get to where the repairs need to be done. And in cases where the roads have been washed away by floods, to just get access to these systems is very difficult. Sometimes power lines are running in mountainous terrain. It's very hard to get to. Example, like in Mozambique, for example, when there were cyclones, it's a very long system. They've got, many developing economies are developing. They're trying to develop their infrastructure, and it's not just the power infrastructure; it's the road infrastructure, it's communications infrastructure, and so it's like big sort of extreme weather events which are knocking out power systems are not just knocking out power systems; they're knocking out communication systems and road systems, and these kind of all these sectors really need to be addressed in an integrated manner. And the reason I mentioned Marcel is because he mentioned this integrated planning, and so it's the idea of planning. You're planning not just your generation, and resilient generation, but you're planning your resilient and timely invested and constructed distribution and transmission system. So this idea of integrated planning and integrated resilient planning, I think, is very important across the board, be it a robust, resilient power system or the recovery process, which I think is equally as important.
Yeah, definitely. You touched upon really key points there. Integrated planning, it's one of the solutions. So we will note it down, and thanks for raising it. And apparently, like, there's a good compromise around, like sharing this as a solution from the panelists as well. But now looking at Slido and our audience, thank you for engaging with us. Would like to address some of the questions, if you don't mind, from the audience. And I think that one of them that it's quite relevant for what we just discussed now is the specific adaptation of challenges that will be faced in terms of when we are building the infrastructure. So I think looking at the TSO infrastructure, transmission system operator now, you manage some of the challenges, and one of the people in the audience were quite interested in what are the reasons that are making this further advancing in infrastructure development lagging behind. So I think that could be quite interesting to know from your perspective.
Yes, I think there are certain points, but one important point is the whole approval procedure. To build a new line, you need to go through long approval procedures, and you have many stakeholders which have objections to the project, and this is slowing down the project a lot, especially if those objections come in a late stage of the project planning, and we have to adapt the planning again. This is one of the reasons for delays. And another reason for delay is we see a huge demand in Europe on building new infrastructure. So suppliers and also talents are getting more and more rare. And that's another big challenge we see, that just capacity of the market is not following the demand we have.
Yeah, very interesting point on the talents as well, and how we can do better in attracting the talents in this sector, because we definitely need it. And looking at another question from our audience is in terms of cooperation between TSOs and DSOs. And Louise, I'm going to look at you now, because you mentioned cooperation, and I think that if you would like to take this question in terms of how we can improve the resilience of the grid based on the cooperation, maybe what best practices, exchanges could be shared between the transmission and distribution system that could contribute to better addressing this challenging and...
Yep. So at European level, I would say that the principle of cooperation is immediately applying with the implementation of the risk preparedness regulation. And each competent national authority must set up a risk preparedness plan. So first of all, I would say that getting TSOs and DSOs working together on a risk preparedness regulation, on a risk preparedness plan, this is very important. But on top of that, we need to have the market parties that needs to also efficiently provide inputs to this risk preparedness plan. We need to have, I think it's also another aspect, it's not only about system operators, getting the market parties involved. It will help also to invest, to make the grid much more resilient, to have the right incentive from the market perspective to invest, for instance, on smart grids, and to get a much more robust system.
Thank you very much for this point as well. And I'm thinking now of how we can, based on what you said, exchange of practices, of data, how we can better make this exchange become more efficient. So I don't know, Craig, based on your experience, I see a question from the audience there in terms of how we can make this exchange of data more efficient while situation is in crisis. And is there anything that we can do in that regard in terms of better exchanging of data between all these sectors that you mentioned in terms of the planning and so on?
So I think one of the things is that, I mean, the earlier keynote speaker mentioned about how there's all this data on climate science, and how do we convert it to something which is tangible that we can turn into actual implementation of resilient measures. And it's, I think one of the things is that they're doing, and I believe it's ENTSO-E, but it's definitely European sort of funded, which is converting a lot of this sort of climate science into power system ready data, so how that can be used in studies. So, for example, having what is the impact of changes in temperature, and how does this impact then on demand, weather-dependent demand, and how does it impact maybe on hydrology and aspects like this. I know one of the things which is less known and which may be very important is what will the impact of water flows be on, or the availability of water be on the availability then of growing, or on the nuclear fleet, which is obviously very important for the European power system now, and and in fact, it will be, according to our IEA projections, it will continue to be important for the future for a net zero sort of power system. So how do we then have the availability of water? How does this change as according to climate change? So I think it's important that many of the sort of responsible parties within operating in certain sectors are able to convert this very often misunderstood data, and it's very broad. There's many climate change scenarios, and that this has many implications on very different parts of the weather system. How do we then convert this to something that can then be implemented by the utilities, something that is tangible and understandable? And I think a lot of this then rests in those utilities, or not utilities, I'd say those power system stakeholders or various other sector stakeholders that can, which understand how to interpret this data, and then understand how to then share this with those concerned stakeholders, the utilities, for example. And I think there's a lot of work being done on this. Another example is, for example, IPCC. Now they have their climate change report, and they are actually releasing data directly that is being allowed to be used in these sort of studies. So I think there is an understanding that we need this data, and that and it's really important for this idea of doing these impact assessments and understanding the issue or the risk that our power systems face in going into the future. So I very much agree with that question, that we do need, data is key for understanding.
And now I'm looking a little bit at you, Marcel, because I saw one of the questions in the audience that they were looking at offshore grids as well. So when it comes to offshore, because now we know at the EU level we have big objectives in terms of delivering net zero, and offshore deployment, it will be quite an important resource as well. But at the same time, when it comes to building offshore infrastructure, what can you tell us of the challenges there? Are we facing similar challenges? Are we looking at that as well? Is there something specific around that could be useful to look at?
Well, from Switzerland perspective, offshore is not really our topic, but of course we are integrated in Europe, and of course we see that a lot of offshore wind is happening in Germany, which is of course influencing the whole grid in Europe. Also in Switzerland, we see a lot of energy flow depending on the weather. So I think in general the whole renewable integration is a big challenge for the network. We see in our network that we have to interfere more and more year by year. Then the number of interference, like how do you say, redispatches, for example, this is increasing year by year, and that's of course also a sign which shows us that the resilience of the network is very important, that we have enough capacity to also cope with the different flows we see in the network.
Yeah, thank you for addressing this. And I think that definitely when it comes to the grid management and integrating renewables, we face some of the challenges in terms of intermittency and also physics that could make the system operation also could challenge an efficient system operation. However, there are a lot of solutions that are being developed, as you mentioned, in that regard as well. So definitely on the right track. And I think that would be important also to, as we are addressing this issue in a very policy and political context, I think it would be great if we could think about these challenges and mitigating solutions. And I would turn to your experiences again, but this time in terms of any kind of recommendations or maybe relevant points that you think the regulators here would need to be aware of and would make your lives easier, would be worth mentioning and raising so that we can help the contribution and the translation of what we are speaking to the decision makers as well. Who wants to address this? Maybe Louise. Yeah.
I think clearly let's say the biggest challenge that needs to be brought to the policymakers is the investment challenge. I think if we fail on decarbonization objective, this will increase the cost of climate adaptation. But if there is a failure to adapt to climate change, this will translate into a massive economic disaster. If we look at the figures from the European Environmental Agency, we are talking about 145 billions of economic losses for the last decade with regards extreme weather events. Also, what happened 2 summers ago here in Belgium and also in Germany with the floods. I mean, the damages, we are talking about 46 billion euros. So whatever we can invest right now will be cheaper than what we can invest tomorrow. And that's very important to understand that. And how to do that? Let's say the warm potatoes should go to the regulators, as you just said. The regulator must now promote much more anticipatory investment. They should much more also promote a long-term planning horizon. To do so, they should look at incentive resilience incentive mechanism, so we can really uptake a bit the different climate adaptation measures and also promote more smart technologies that has proven to be really efficient to manage the grid and also to restore and to prevent in case of extreme weather events.
Thank you for this. And looking at you, Marcel, any kind of, point that you would try to raise?
One of my most important point is really the approval procedure, which is most hurting us at the moment. So that's of course a wish to have speed up in those procedures. And it's also important, I think, that we all work in the same framework. And what we have in Switzerland by the Federal Council, the framework was given. So we have a scenario framework on how is the development for the upcoming years when it comes to renewable integration, what's the production mix, what's the consumption forecasted for the coming years of electricity when it comes to the new energy strategy. So this is like 3 scenarios which are given to us, and that helps a lot for our planning. So everybody knows that's the framework to plan the network with. This is for the TSOs, but also for the DSOs. So this helps us to have a common view on the future, and this scenario framework is adapted every 4 years, so you also have the possibility to adapt to new developments, and I think that helps a lot. That everybody works towards the same target.
I don't know if you would have anything to add to that. I know that you're working for an agency, so it's still, but based on your recommendations and really like assessments and reports.
Yeah, I would reiterate maybe what Louisa said, is that the idea that there really has to be an incentive for resilient infrastructure or resilient practices, in fact, because a lot of the benefit is at a very high level. It's like if you avoid a national blackout, or rolling blackouts or whatever it is, it's really got a national interest for the economy. And how do you take that the billions saved for the economy and filter that down as, to be an incentive for a single utility? There really needs to be the sort of regulation that makes this possible. So, for example, like a performance-based metrics, things like this that allow it to be translated to these various components of the system. Like I mentioned before, this is the electricity system. It's a value chain from literally the fuel supply to the production to the transmission, distribution, and even down to the demand. And so, how do we make all of this work together in a resilient manner, and we reap the benefits of resiliency, which is sometimes seen at a very, very high level. And just to why I wanted to add, we were talking about maybe resilient infrastructure, but it's not necessarily have to be resilient infrastructure, but also resilient operational practices. How do we, doing things like routine maintenance that maybe on, like, for example, cutting away the trees that are around transmission lines in areas which are now increased wildfire risk, or maybe it's aspects like incorporating weather forecasting into where wildfires or fire weather may be, things that they've employed, for example, in Australia, and they then increase the sort of, so instead of an N-1 contingency for the running of the system there, it's an N-2. So the security constrained contingencies that are linked then to fire weather. So these are the sort of things that can be employed, but there really needs to be an incentive to it, and it's probably something that has to be regulatory top-down sort of, something that is being told that you need to do this so that we can reap these benefits. You need to have some sort of performance linked to this. But this is just one idea. And in fact, maybe the point is that we actually need to find a way to find the sort of mechanism that works to allow this to happen.
Yeah, many thanks for these points. Really relevant for the topic, and I think that definitely looking at from this perspective at the solutions would help decision makers as well. However, in terms of the Slido questions, I think that a lot of people in our audience were quite interested in the scarcity and how we are using digital tools as well. So I just want to address that with you as well. As we know, climate change can bring a lot of scarcity in terms of natural resources. So one of the questions is there, like, how we are going to make sure to make up for that in terms of ensuring adequacy of the system, that we have enough resources for that. So thinking about how we could address the scarcity of resources, and what do you think about this point from your experience, Louise, in terms of DSOs? Are they flagging how they are addressing this?
So, if I answer correctly the questions, I think it's about how can digitalize somehow support the grid and make it more resilient. And I think this is going to be an essential piece for the coming years, because we are moving to a much more decentralized system. 70% of the renewables will be connected at distribution level in the coming years. So this is even more important that we rely on a much more smarter grid, digital tools, and already investing now in those tools is actually key if we want to prepare for risk related to physical infrastructure. So I think it was one of the questions from indeed Slido, and I do think it's one of the solutions, one of the tools for resilience, which is complementary, for instance, to undergrounding cables. One is not going to be better than another, because they are complementing each other. So this is really important that we have a wide range of solutions and that we invest in each of them.
Yeah, thank you very much. Marcel, what do you think from this perspective in terms of resource scarcity?
Yeah, we also see that resource scarcity is going to be an issue. I already explored on that when it comes to projects to have enough capacity on the market. And I also believe that in general, digitalization might be supporting us in that, to be more efficient and to gain on operational excellence, helping through digitalization in general. And often if you have those changes, people are scared of their job. But if you have the scarcity on the jobs, maybe this is also an enabler for us for digitalization. So on one hand, I also see a chance in that.
Yeah.
For digitalization.
Definitely a lot of things that digitalization could bring to us in terms of improving our adaptability and resilience. We are also thinking about how to better address these challenges. So in terms of concluding slightly or going towards clear conclusions, or if not clear, at least, to try to give some solutions to these issues that we are discussing about, thinking about your perspective, if you would share some takeaways of the discussions today with our audience in terms of, how you are looking at these challenges in planning the grid, in operating the grid, but also like improving the adaptability. That would be great, so we can, have let's say 2-3 takeaways from you, or even one that could be relevant for the discussion, for the audience to be able to take away from this.
Sure. I can start, right? So, I mean, I think the main, I'll try to give 3 main takeaways. The main takeaway would probably be that we need to mainstream climate resilience and adaptation measures for our power sector. So, and that means this is really at the highest of level in national energy strategies, because you need that to really, you need to be collecting ideas about how how climate impacts the power system. You need to be collecting ideas of how we can address these challenges, and to have a really, high level strategic view on this. It's not something that you do overnight, it's something that you develop, and I think this idea of mainstreaming these ideas is very important. And of course, once this is done, then it's about identifying what are the impacts for our power system. How is our power system going to develop? It's transitioning, we know this. It's going to be more distributed. It's going to be, there's going to be, the grid is going to be more important for the sort of reliability of the system. And the grid is, has a massive footprint. It's hugely exposed to climate risks and climate impacts. So we need to really identify how it will be impacted, and then of course the measures that then need to be taken place. And then I think my third thing would be that we need to reevaluate this constantly. This is a developing science. Our power system is developing. We don't know how it will develop. We don't know, are we going to need lots of lithium for lithium-ion batteries, or will we have, redox flow batteries? This is all changing, and so our requirements for the future power system these are also changing, and I think we really need to have this sort of not only a short-term view, which is also very important, but even medium to long-term view, and to constantly look at what is at risk of it in terms of the supply chain and in terms of the technologies that we need, and then to constantly reevaluate this as these things progress and our understanding of it changes.
Yeah, thank you very much for this.
I think from my perspective, we are in a huge change of our energy system. We changed the production of our electricity. We aim to consume even more electricity because we're going to replace it for the fossil energy. So that's a huge challenge we are facing. We have the climate change, which also brings a lot of threats to us, and I think we only going to manage that if we work together. We already talked about integrated planning, so I think it's not going to work out if we work in silos. So it's a challenge the society is facing together, and we only manage it if we work together towards the same targets.
And so from my side, I think it's about forward-looking investments. Forward-looking, so I think it reverts to what you just said, Craig. It's about getting a very integrated planning, a strategy at national but also European level, and to anticipate, and also meaning also to adapt. And then on investment, I think we have potentially a good opportunity when revising now the electricity market design to have a more grid investment high in the agenda, and to make sure that we invest now in our infrastructure to get it more resilience for the near future.
Thank you very much. So definitely we can say that we had picked up some points here that hopefully it will be useful for the topic today, and definitely looking at how to build the resilience, better cooperation, improve the planning in terms of visibility of all this data and how we integrate it, work together, but also looking at all the opportunities that come why not with the electricity market design review now that the Commission will launch today, probably the proposal, or we can look at long-term investment as well, and how to build and continue to further develop the infrastructure that is needed to deliver the net zero challenge by 2050. And thank you for all for your contributions, and thank you for the work that you do, and happy to be working all together in terms of delivering this big project of our generation. And definitely the energy infrastructure, electricity infrastructure has a clear role in it, and as long as we can still discuss about challenges and looking at how to improve and share better data and information that is relevant for enabling a resilient infrastructure and robust planning, I think that we are definitely at least on the right track. So thank you very much for your insights. Hopefully the audience could have some good takeaways in terms of what we are looking at in the future. And I'm really happy now to give the floor to Steffi to take us through the next steps of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the panel. Really, really interesting discussion. Great to hear your insights into the topic. Great to have the very different perspectives represented on the panel. And definitely really relevant takeaway for me to hear integrated planning is key, to hear that actually there's not one silver bullet, but there are many different things that we should be working on now. And this definitely sets up our discussions of the afternoon very well, and makes me even more excited to hear about the best practices that we're going to talk about this afternoon. So thanks a lot to all of you. Thanks also for sharing very specific needs and asks to regulators, policymakers. How do we respond to those? This is exactly what we'll also discuss in the afternoon. I keep referring to the afternoon. This means that actually for now, we're going to go to the lunch break, which we're going to start a little bit earlier. We've been done very well with timekeeping today. So I don't think anyone will be sad about having a little bit of a longer lunch break. We will reconvene here at 2 o'clock. Here means you can use the same link that you used earlier to reconnect, or you can just stay in the connection that you currently have. There will just be a little video playing for you during lunch break. So you can just join us back at 2 p.m. here. And yeah, as I already teased a little bit, when we come back, we will talk about some best practice examples of resilience measures that are already being applied, and discuss how to integrate resilience considerations into energy infrastructure planning and modeling going forward. And this we'll do in our second and final panel of the day. I hope you enjoyed the discussions of the morning as much as I did, and look forward to the afternoon as much as I do. And I'll see you all back here at 2 p.m. Enjoy your lunch break. Good afternoon. Good to have you all back after our lunch break. This is the RGI-ENTSO-E online conference, Adaptation and Resilience of Energy Infrastructure. Nice to have you all with us. This morning, we had the first part of this conference, and we established that the very concrete threats of climate change and related extreme weather events to our needed energy infrastructure, what they are, We discussed what resilience means in terms of that infrastructure and what the issues and open questions are that those working in the field are dealing with. So this afternoon, we actually want to hear about solutions, starting with our best practice showcase and then followed by our final panel of the day, which will discuss resilience-related modeling and planning needs. But first, let's hear from our best practice presenters. In this best practice session, we want to specifically look at measures that are already being taken today to deal with extreme events and increase resilience of energy infrastructure. We will hear about measures on European level planning and on transmission and distribution level. Starting with the European planning perspective, and I'm very happy to welcome David Radu. David, welcome. David is a power system planning specialist from the system development team at ENTSO-E, and we're very happy to hear his presentation. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you also to the organizers of this event, to RGI and ENTSO-E for providing me the chance to discuss a bit about and to give you in the audience a short overview on how ENTSO-E studies leverage data in planning for a climate-resilient pan-European power system over the next decades. So I'd like to get started with something that Sonya already mentioned in the very first words of today, which is the fact that ENTSO-E is legally mandated to conduct periodically a couple of studies. On the one hand, we have adequacy studies. On the other hand, we have the planning studies, such as the TYNDP and the scenarios, to basically achieve two things, at least two things. First would be to facilitate the undertaking of coordinated actions among TSOs at pan-European level. And then the second one would be to provide technically sound data sets and results so that policymakers and researchers or any other interested stakeholder can use and can leverage. Now, the thing is that whatever study we're talking about, whether if it's the TYNDP or any adequacy analysis, such as the European Resource Adequacy Assessment, and even beyond that, such as any outlook that we have seen published in the last years, the least common denominator across all these outlooks or studies is one which is pretty clear. Renewable generation is expected to become dominant in the European electricity mix, and this makes the planning and operation of the associated power system more challenging than ever. In this environment, in this context, what we also expect is to see that data and a proper assessment of the data behind these technologies, such as wind or solar PV, becomes more and more important. Putting on top the recent evolution or developments in climate dynamics, such as occurrence of extreme events, or the climate in general becoming more becoming warmer over the last years and in the years to come, the role of such an assessment becomes even more important. So the question that you might be wondering, and what we would like to showcase here, is what are we doing in terms of climate data? How do we approach it, and what does ENTSO-E do to cover these needs? Well, very briefly, what ENTSO-E is doing currently is to leverage a lot of satellite data, which is provided by the Copernicus service of the European Union, modeled in a way that this data becomes, ready to use within the ENTSO-E studies. This data set covers 38 years, or almost 4 decades of historical data. And having all this data available enables us, on the one hand, to run thousands of adequacy scenarios to understand the security of supply risks in Europe from months ahead to years ahead. And on the other hand, it also enables us within the TYNDP or scenarios, for instance, to understand what are the system needs, taking into account the extreme known climate events or extreme historical climate events. The key word here, or the keywords here, were known climate events, so what we know about, or historical climate events. And this is quite important here because if we want to plan for a climate resilient power system that we will develop to be in use for the next 3, 5 or more decades, we need to do more than that. We need to be aware of how the climate is expected to develop so that our planning is done accordingly. For instance, what we know is that, or like what the IPCC tells us, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they basically tell us that the climate will change in average. The climate will become warmer in average. In this particular plot that you see here, which depicts the global average temperature recorded, ever recorded, we see data from the 1850s until, current day. Now, this is what we've been doing until recently. We've been looking at historical data and trying to plan our energy systems based on what has been realized previously. But the question is, or like not the question, but what we understood rather, is the fact that we should transition from such a setup in which we only look at historical data to a setup in which we have a better idea of how the climate, how the climate could evolve in the next decades. So going from the gray part of the plot, from such a setup to a setup in which we have access to much more different realization of climate over the next decades. This is, of course, available for both demand side because we have temperature which affects demand time series, but it's also available on the supply side because there are studies that show us, that showed us recently that a warming climate will lead to a change in the, for instance, wind patterns throughout Europe and even beyond. So on the one hand, we know the fact that, or we expect the climate to change on average with temperatures increasing, for instance, but what we also know is the fact that the climate will change with respect to its variance. Extreme events, we have observed that extreme events are more and more frequent. We're talking about heat waves, cold spells, droughts, floods. This was again mentioned in one of the previous, I think it was in the first keynote of the day. And all these events contribute to the resilience actually of the power system. So we should be able to plan accordingly when we're looking at the systems as a whole. So good news is that we are aware of this. We already started preparing for this, and basically in the next couple of slides, I would like to just give a very short overview of what ENTSO-E plans to do from a very pragmatic standpoint. So what we've been doing is that on the one hand, within ENTSO-E, within the association, we were very well aware of what's coming. We've been listening to like all the scientists, the reports around telling us like what's waiting for in terms of climate. On the other hand, we also had a lot of feedback from the NRAs, from the regulatory agencies, and also from the NGOs telling us that we should transition from like historical data towards projections. And this is exactly what we're doing. And we're going to do this as of about 6 months ago when we signed a memorandum of understanding with the European European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, which is simply put the best source for climate data that you could basically find in Europe at this stage. And through them and the Copernicus service of the European Union, we will, over the next months, or like more accurately, over the next couple of years, we plan to develop a set of climate data sets that will enable us to understand different futures of climate in the years to come. Essentially, what we want to achieve is to have a comprehensive data set that, such as the one that you see here in this plot, where we can see average wind output over Europe according to different climate models and different emission scenarios. So what we want to achieve is to have a big data set that enables us to study this particular topic, this particular element of climate change into our models, that takes into account the climate scenario, climate models and emission scenarios which are in line with the IPCC reports. Just to summarize, we expect to be able to account for such modeling features for this kind of data as early as the next European Resource Adequacy Assessment cycle, which starts next year. And this would enable us to take a big leap in terms of ensuring that our outlooks properly account for climate change and for to better take into account the changes in the climate that have an impact on developing and planning climate resilient energy system, and to mitigate, of course, the risks posed by climate change in power system planning and operation. Thank you very much, and do not hesitate to reach out to us in case you have any question.
Thank you so much, David,
Absolutely.
for this overview, which I'm sure will be picked up by the panel that follows.
I surely hope so.
Thank you so much for your contribution. And I'm now going to introduce the second speaker of our best practice showcase. And this is going to be Silverio Casuli, Head of Grid Resilience and Security Planning at Italian TSO Terna. Hello, Silverio. Thanks a lot for joining me. Silverio will share the resilience strategy for Italy's transmission infrastructure with us. And we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the introduction and to giving us the opportunity to join in this conference and to discuss this important topic about the resilience. I'm Silverio Casuli, the responsible of the resilience and security plan in Terna, and in the next minute I will describe which is the strategy adopted by our company in order to increase the resilience of the power system. So we start from this assumption: the climate change is a reality and it's affected more and more us every day. This assumption is being confirmed by the scientific community. In fact, the latest IPCC report evidence highlight that in the next future, the surface temperature will increase at least until the middle of the century. In addition, in the graph on the left, the net cut service recorded more than 3,000 data of natural event, and they have tripled in the last 40 years. In terms of impact on our transmission network, thanks to the study of the past, we allied that the number of the catastrophic events that affected our transmission network will increase. For example, all of you will remind what happened 5 years ago in Vaia. During this catastrophic event in the northern of Italy, we lost 2 interconnection lines with Austria and Switzerland, but also internally we falling down more than 60 lines that contemporarily in parallel go out of service, causing a lot of damage in terms of economic. We are talking about billions of damage. What is the results of this? Thanks to the evidence obtained in the last year, we take the conviction that the current methods are not anymore useful in order to capture the increase of frequency and increase of the climate change. Therefore, in 2019, we start a new collaboration with the RSI, that's a research company, important research company in Italy, and together with them, we develop a new methodology in order to assess the level of the resilience of power system. The methodology is characterized by 3 pillars: the use of a prospective climate model, because compared to the past, we don't use anymore historical data, but we use a prospective climate model, and we determine the probability of occurrence for different thresholds for the 3 that we analyze. Secondly, the second pillar of the methodology is the use of the assessment vulnerability. We, thanks to the introduction of vulnerability curves, we identify the probability of failure of the component using an engineeristic approach and the real data of the component. And the third pillar, we introduce a contingency analysis. Thanks to the contingency analysis, we perform a load flow calculation, and for each grid node of the network, we are able to quantify two important key indicators: the returning period and the energy not service. We perform this calculation checking the pre-intervention and also the post-intervention when we introduce some intervention in order to integrate, enhance the resilience of the network in order to capture the benefit. Thanks to a strong collaboration with the RSI, but also with our NRA, we received a positive opinion by them in 2022, and we use the methodology in order to plan a first set of intervention on our network. From 2017, we start multiple initiatives in order to increase the resilience of our network. We collect all these initiatives, and in 2021, we published the first edition of the Resilience Plan. This is an integrated document that collects all the initiatives for the increase of the resilience of the network that Terna will launch in the next 5 years. We don't have only a single category of the intervention, but we have multiple categories in order to have a correct balance in terms of investment. We have preventive intervention that are intervention ex ante, regardless the effective occurrence of the intervention, of the phenomena. We have the restorating intervention that are measures that are implemented ex post in response of the effective occurrence of the intervention, the mitigating measures that are aiming to reduce the risk and damage for the network, and also the monitoring that are able to monitor the network in order to prevent some critical situation on our network. In the next slide, I will provide some example of such intervention for each category. Starting from the preventive intervention, they are characterized mostly from infrastructural intervention. In the latest resilience plan, we plan more than 20 interventions that will go in operation before mostly around 2026. And depending from the characteristic of the network, but also from the operation of the network, we identify different kind of this intervention. We have the rebuilding of the line, having the scope to reinforce the mechanical characteristic of the network, the conversion overhead line into underground cable in order to grant the immunization of the network, and lastly, the new line building in order to enhance the meshing of the grid. Moving to the other kind of measure, we have the mitigation measure. The main initiative that we plan in this category is the installation of the anti-torsional device, thanks to the done by our technological department. We start the experimentation of this new initiative in 2024. We covered almost 80,000 kilometers of network, and in next year we'll extend the perimeter, installing the device for over 1,000 kilometers in addition. I mentioned also the new icephobic paint that are new conductor with special paint in order to avoid the formation with snow, and the interface spacer device in order to avoid in dynamic and static situation the contact between the phase. Going to the restoration, in coordination with the distributor, we introduce a new emergency plan, such as the introduction of a generator that can be useful for island mode, and also to reinforce the equipment used by the operator, as such as the helicopter or mobile phone, in order to facilitate the location of the fault and reduce the timing of restoration. About the monitoring, lastly, I mentioned the installation of sensor in order to monitor some specific characteristic of the meteorological variable, and also innovative tool introduced in the control room in order to alert difficult situation and propose some countermeasures that can be adopted in real time in response to the extreme weather condition critically happen on the network. So just to conclude, we have to do something, but we have to do more. So due to climate change, we have to reinforce our commitment in order to increase the resilience of the network. Therefore, in the next resilience plan, we'll analyze additional critical area in order to enlarge the basket of the intervention proposed in the plan in coordination with the distribution. Also, in collaboration always with the RSE, we are performing additional study in order to enhance our methodology, and also with the technological department, we are identifying additional innovative solutions that can be adopted on our network. And just to finish, we are continuing the collaboration with university and research center in order to enhance the current model that we have implemented in the methodology, and also to study additional complex and natural phenomena due to the climate change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Silverio.
Thank you.
And very great to hear that Terna is already considering all these issues. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, we will look at a very concrete example of extreme weather impact in Western Germany and how distribution system operator Westnetz, part of E.ON, reacted by adjusting their resilience approach. Here with us from E.ON is Michael Wilch. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Project lead for the company's iNets smartification project. Michael, we're very excited to hear from you, and over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. So, yeah, my name is Michael Wilch. I work for E.ON SE in Germany. And in contrast to what we've heard before, I will now tell you a little bit about the DSO's experience. The DSO's experience with a very disastrous flood you all will remember, which hit us in summer 2021. Germany was affected, Belgium was affected, as far as I remember, as far as I know, also parts of France were affected. Just to give you an impression, what we see here are pictures from the region where we supply people with electricity. And you see on the upper left side, for example, a picture of a secondary substation. Some of these concrete stations we have in our systems you usually see in the streets, and you see it thrown away by the water masses. So you can easily imagine which forces are active during such a flood. You see on the right side a primary substation, so a high voltage substation, which is completely flooded and of course out of operation at this moment. And in the middle you can see, after the water has run away, the damage, the extreme damage to the overall infrastructure in that area. After we resupplied our customers as fast as possible, we of course had this strategic approach of what would we like to do in future. So how would we like to cope with extreme weather events? Because as has been said before by all the other presenters, extreme weather events will take place more often than in the past due to climate change. So we decided that extreme weather events shall not have significant impact on our distribution systems. On distribution systems, we made resilient against such events, which means as a first step, we need high power backbone structures which need to survive extreme weather events, because we need some nucleus where we resupply our customers from directly after an event. Of course, during the event, we would like to keep critical infrastructure such as hospitals, rescue services, police stations, firefighter departments, etc., securely supplied with electricity, because that's of utmost importance, of course, to save lives in an affected area. And just after the events, of course, customers shall be resupplied after a defined period as quickly as possible, as you can easily imagine. To do so, we heard from my colleague from Terna that if you do a strategic approach, you look at your supply area, and then you identify the assets which are at risk, and then you can sort these assets into some categories you would like to use to limit the effects of, for example, flooding in this case. So you can have something flood-proof by location, of course. So if you put a substation on the top of the hill, you can be quite sure that it won't be flooded even in such an extreme weather event. You can also make something flood-proof by technology. So by doing so, you make sure that it will be operational even if it is submerged in water, which is something you usually do in, for example, in harbors or similar locations. What we decided in many cases is that we put something in a state which we call flood tolerant. So it goes out of service when it is flooded to ensure safety, but there are no measures necessary to re-energize it. So after the water run away, you can re-energize it quickly and easily. And and that's the right category for most of our household customers and the installations we have there. We use something which is protected against flood, which will be flooded, will go out of operation, but won't be destroyed, and can be easily re-energized after certain measures have been taken. So we send our personnel there, they make sure that it's clean, that it's undamaged, and that it's safe to re-energize it directly. So flood protected by location, there's one example I would like to give you here. What we've seen when we analyzed the flooding afterwards, after the event, is that the area which was flooded was extremely more than you would expect for the flood which occurs one time in 100 years. So if you look on the experience from the past, then you won't see the flooding as realistic as we've seen it during this extreme event. So what you have to go for is a scenario meteorologists call extreme flooding. So there's an extreme flooding scenario which is much more than the flooding you would expect one time in 100 years. And we use this flood line, this extreme flood line, as the relevant criterion for rebuilding our system. You can see this on the map on the left, the orange locations with the yellow cross are secondary substations, old locations of secondary substations which have been flooded, which are destroyed, and then we moved them upwards the hill, and also the MV cable to make sure that in a similar event they won't be flooded. And we have this high power backbone, this high power MV backbone where we can resupply our customers from after the event. But if you look at this zoom in map also, you can see that you also have to take into account that in severe rain, you have streams of water running down the hills, and you have to make sure that these streams of waters do not go down the hill directly where a secondary substation is. So analyze the topology of your area and make sure that your secondary substations are out of such risky areas. Just move it away, 100 meters would do, and that's it basically, to make sure that it won't be flooded by these extreme rains. But there's more we can do. So that is very static. That is grid planning. That is what you do to make it safe for the next 50 years, as one of my transmission TSO colleagues has just said. But there are additional measures, operational measures mainly, you have to take to cope with severe events. So we have to increase the number of spare parts. That's something we have learned very well just after the event. We need a lot of spare parts to re-energize our systems, to re-energize our customers after such an event. And of course, you need a high number of qualified personnel. We have been able at E.ON, because we have many DSOs, and colleagues could help us from other supply areas. But you need more personnel. You need to standardize, of course, to make spare part management easier. But you also have to have blackout communication on the one hand to your smart assets to see what is happening out there. And on the other hand, also to public authorities to make sure that you react as is necessary. So that's it, maybe more at the panel discussion. And I would like to hand back over to Stephanie.
Michael, thank you so much. Great insight that will carry over into the panel discussion as well. Thank you so much. And yeah, as I said, Michael will directly connect his talk to the panel discussion. So Michael, you can already take a seat if you want to. And we will move over to the next panel, which starts now. So for our final panel of the day, we want to discuss how we can leverage all the knowledge we have and all the needs we are aware of to make sure that our planning and modeling of energy infrastructure becomes more resilient going forward. For this, we have again invited speakers bringing different perspectives from across the energy sector. But before I introduce them, one quick word on how you at home can engage with our panel here. So as in the morning session, you will be able to use Slido. And you should see on your screen the Slido section where you can post any questions that you might have to our panelists. And you can also vote questions up that you think are most important from among the ones that the others you see in the chat have asked. And I also encourage you to start asking questions at the very beginning, even though we're likely going over to the Q&A portion of the panel towards the end of this discussion. Yeah, but now to the panel. Your moderator will be Antonella Battaglini, the CEO of the Renewables Grid Initiative, who you've already met in the welcome session this morning. And our experts on the panel are we have Gerald Kendler on the panel, who's chair of the System Development Committee at ENTSO-E. We have the familiar face from the previous session, Dr. Michael Wilch, project lead INETS at E.ON. On the third chair, Cosimo Tanzini, policy officer for renewable energy at the European Environmental Bureau. And last but certainly not least, Oana Langer, Policy Officer for Infrastructure and Regional Cooperation at the DG Energy of the European Commission. And then very finally joining us remotely is Alessia De Vita, Director of E3 Modeling's Berlin office and an expert in environmental, energy and climate policy modeling, as well as impact assessment studies. Yeah, we're very happy to have our expert panelists here, and I don't want to delay the conversation any further. Over to you, Antonella.
Thank you very much, Steffi, and welcome again to everybody. So we will try to have the panel as dynamic as possible. Please be ready to provide input, also interrupt your colleague if necessary. And Alessia, I will be happy to involve you. As soon as you want to talk, just make a sign or simply jump into the conversation. And I would like to start with Oana, actually, because we have, Oana from the European Commission, you have been involved in many new packages recently. So what is your take? How valuable, how needed it is, resilience of energy infrastructure going ahead, especially in view of what we learned today, that climate change is there to stay, impacts will increase, and of course the ability of decarbonizing and of reaching decarbonization targets in a given time frame are dependent on the infrastructure that we have and we will build. So what is the Commission position on resilience and adaptation?
I know you like to often ask this, Antonella, so thanks a lot for inviting me here today. Thanks to RGI-ENTSO-E for making this possible and for having this important conversation. It's difficult when you join the last panel of the day to actually avoid repeating some of the stuff that have been said, and I think my aim today is to simply to echo what the different experts and practitioners have already shared. So the why and the how we need to build infrastructure that is resilient in the face of hazardous climate change effects. Now, to answer shortly to your question, Antonella, adaptation is crucial. That's basically the short answer. Unfortunately, the conversation is a bit nascent, I would say, albeit important and complex, and we've heard this all day. If we take a step back, for example, on mitigation, our efforts really go way back. So thanks to commitment, thanks to awareness, we now have a very clear path towards 2050. So towards reaching climate neutrality in 2050 with clear targets for 2030 and 2040. Now, as regards mitigation, so we've got all the infrastructure in place that would enable this net zero society that we want in 2050. But these projects are not planned nor built in a void. They are the ones that are facing the extreme heat, the extreme weather situation like wildfires, like flooding, like strong windstorms. So if we do not take into account, so assess or manage these effects. These effects of basically the hazard of climate change will affect the performance of the asset that we're actually planning and we're basing on to reach climate neutrality. So we have operational issues, financial, completely different financial situation, or a completely different environmental performance of these assets, which in short means that these assets do not deliver the benefits that they were set out for in order for us to reach our objectives. So we're going to fall short of the climate and energy objectives we have set out for us. I mean, you've heard it often, many times today. I'm not going to repeat what we've seen no later than this summer, the low electricity output generation from hydropower, the lack of cooling water that affected the functioning of thermal and nuclear power plants. All this, although we're not talking about infrastructure, so direct lines being hit, impact the grid. When the grid is impacted, we have security of supply challenges, and therefore translates into direct price fluctuations that I don't think we need to talk more about how we want to keep this in a manageable way for our consumers. So just going back, because I want to refer to something that David was said and connect it a bit with what I want to say now. We need to make sure that these assets are already in the modeling phase. We sort of plan for them in the most appropriate manner, using the most appropriate scenarios. And we heard what ENTSO-E is doing as regards that. We need to think when we plan for the siting of a certain investment, whether that region is more vulnerable to the hazardous climate change impacts I just referred to. And we need to think about inbuilt features that would increase the resilience of that specific investment. And I don't know how much time I've got, probably not a lot, but I'll just say that we're now trying to build this sort of risk culture within the Commission. So I'll briefly refer to the fact that the Commission has published a guidance on climate proofing. So this is basically the basis, right? It refers to risks on how to identify risks and classify, and comes to help promoters with a sort of a step-wise approach on how to assess vulnerability and risk when planning infrastructure. So it mainstreams climate adaptation measures in the planning and implementation of projects. So it helps promoters to think how sensitive that investment is to certain hazards and how much exposed they are depending on the probability for different hazards to appear where that specific investment is cited. We took that knowledge and we reflected it in the revision of the TENI regulation, so the Trans-European Energy Networks regulation, which is the unique instrument that we have for planning cross-border energy infrastructure at EU level. So it's basically placed in several provisions, still with the caveat that we didn't want to increase the administrative burden of promoters. So we go in the upstream part, we're asking promoters to reflect climate adaptation in the CBA, so in the project-specific cost-benefit analysis, and later on to reflect in the implementation plan basically the different feasibility studies and design studies that show how climate adaptation is taken into account from the get-go, and report annually on how these measures are being implemented and monitored. And later on, when the permitting phase starts, that all the information regarding climate adaptation is part of the pre-application procedure. So I said we're at the beginning, which means that we're still collecting knowledge, and today's discussion has been already super interesting at this point in time, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the insights. And just to say that after a certain time of applying these provisions, we're going to come up with a report sharing the most innovative practices in climate adaptation measures and taking basically the best of what the project promoters have put forward. This timeline is set, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of 2027. So until then, we're in a very kind of a steep learning curve. So this is the big picture, and yeah, I look forward to exchanging with you.
Thank you very much, Oana. And you mentioned something that made me want to ask straight away a question, which is you mentioned that you have criteria. I maybe translate them into pre-qualification criteria, fit for future climate. Are these going to become compulsory, or is this, or the intention of the Commission is to have simply guidelines on, resilient infrastructure?
No, thanks for that, Antonella. I mean, at this point in time, we're at the guidance kind of level, right? We're trying to gather as much knowledge as possible. So it was said today that there's a lot as regards science. So we're gathering a lot of climate science and data, but this is making its way into the policy making. So we have not been prescriptive as regards these climate adaptation measures and how the documentation for the project promoter should look like. This is a conversation that we're going to have within the so-called regional groups, within the framework of all the soft tools we have created in the process for selecting projects of common interest and mutual interest at EU level. So I would just stay clear from the word, compulsory and obligatory, because that tends to create a lot of
Very good. So I would like to move to Gerald, and you are already acquainted with planning for the future, for sure. We have heard in the best practices examples that we cannot simply rely on historical data, because what has happened in the past is nothing in comparison to what we are expecting for the future. And therefore, can you tell us how exactly you plan energy infrastructure, the energy system, under your control, in a way that should stand for the next 70 years or so?
Okay, thank you, Antonella. Yes, first, the energy transition is about electricity, using more electricity. So electricity infrastructure becomes more and more important, and it is highly loaded. So we really utilize it right now. That's one challenge. The other challenge is, we heard the flooding at the Ahr River. We heard many other examples. So we see the impact on climate change. So we have there two issues. We have things like flooding, we have wind, we have winter icing, all those things that can affect directly infrastructure. And climate change, more warmer days, we have more warmer days. Now, the infrastructure, the lines, they heat up when they're utilized. And when the days are warmer, this really reinforces the problem. So it's really a challenge to work with the assets that have to be more utilized at the same time when the temperatures and the surrounding it's more adverse to it. And then the question is, Antonella's, how do we deal with that?
How do you plan? How do you?
There are two things. Number one is the new build. The new build, what we build new, we take all those things into account. We look exactly at where can we place the towers, where can we place the substations. We look exactly what conductors we use so they can actually use those high temperatures. We look at the soils of cables so we don't have dehydration. All those different issues we do when planning. But at the same time, we have to utilize the existing grid. And the existing grid, that is really the tricky part, because that we have to change on the run and we have to make this also more resilient. And there also, in the Italian case, it was that we need more monitoring. We need to look at all the different effects while it is operating. So what we actually do, we look, what do we need for the future? We look at each asset class, what does it have to face? How resilient do we have to make it? And then we also look at the existing grid. What do we have to do in reinforcement there? And what do we have to change on the operational side, on monitoring, and also to make the whole operation more resilient to change?
Okay, thank you. So it seems that you are very confident that all is going to be fine. Alessia, I would like to ask you, how is your work and modeling, the modeling of the energy system going to help the system planners to actually indeed deliver a resilient system?
Yes, so similar to the work for the European Commission to a certain extent, until now our modeling has been mainly focused on adaptation measures. And slowly we are going into the idea more and more of including adaptation in order, because exactly as was just mentioned now, it is important that any mitigation measures that we take also will work when in a world which is affected by climate change.
And if they don't work?
Well, then, because we're doing modeling in the longer term for 2050, 2070, then we should be using different technologies and doing different scenarios in order to see how we, in order to make the correct choices. And because we deal exactly with the long-term modeling, this is exactly what we're trying to do. And through a number also of Horizon Europe projects, such as, for example, a project called CLINT, where we are using artificial intelligence in order to study climate data sets for the causation and the detection of extreme events, and in order to use the results of all the people who are doing all these work on climate change in order to include it in our modeling of the energy system. In order to check already today, as much as possible, or I mean in the next coming years, that all the choices that we take are already resilient to climate change.
Thank you very much. Michael, you mentioned in your intervention about the challenges of getting the spare parts after the flooding system. I would like to talk a bit about this, because it seems to me that if we really want to cope with such level of changes and be ready for extreme weather impact, we need to push standardization much more than we ever done before. So actually, this is a question for both of you, and maybe also from Anna from the Commission, and then we come to Cosimo. But really, how do we increase resilience also through standardization?
Yeah, so by standardization, we can, of course, make our business during the rebuild of a system, of an affected part of the system, more easier and more quicker by having standard assets there at hand. So it's of course in our own interest as a company to standardize, because it makes our lives easier, it makes us more efficient in normal operation, but it also makes us quicker during or just after such severe events. If you choose only from 3 transformers in a secondary substation, then it's of course much easier and much faster than if you have 10 transformers and you have to choose the right one. So that shows where harmonization and standardization can help you out. Of course, also for spare parts management, that's much easier. As you can imagine, if you put 3 different transformers on stock, then you need less space and you can store more transformers than if you have a variety of 10. But what I also have to tell is that it makes procurement easier. So what we see now currently is that we have significant issues with procurement, with manufacturers being hardly able to deliver all the transformers, all the cables, and all the assets we need in a timely manner and in the volumes we need them. So we're having a twofold challenge here we are facing. So on the one hand, we have to reinforce our systems to cope with the energy transition. That is why we need a huge amount of new assets from our manufacturers. And on the other hand, we have to also to refill our stocks to make sure we are prepared for the next event. So it's a twofold challenge, and we are in close collaboration and in close exchange with our manufacturers to evaluate in how far we can go further jointly with standardization, and how to make sure that the whole supply chain can get working again, to make sure that we can procure what we need.
So standardization, procurement, probably short supply chains.
And she said I could jump in.
Yes, please.
I'm doing it. Okay, there are 2 parts for it. One really is to make the system more resilient in planning, but the other thing is also business continuity management, so that we actually plan for those things. And there it's spare parts and people, and well-trained people. That is really, really important. So we put more effort into training our people. And then, Antonella, you said I look very optimistic. I think why I look optimistic is because I'm an engineer. I'm trained to solve problems. And also here I speak for ENTSO-E, and the ENTSO-E are the TSOs of Europe, and we coordinate, we talk, we exchange views. For example, Terna explained very well what they are doing. I know that REN in Portugal is also doing vegetation management with the threats of fires. So we exchange those information, we learn, we become better every day. And I think that's also a big part, first to be prepared, and secondly, if something happens, to help each other. We have very good examples how we helped each other in case of dire need.
So solidarity, cross-border solidarity. Yes. Short supply chain, standardization, spare parts. And of course, we have touched upon the difficulties in procurement. Is there any chance that the Commission can help European industries actually to shorten the supply chain? Because whatever we do today, we are confronted with global pressures on the market. And if we are going to experience more and more impacts, it implies that we need to have availability close to where we need, and we don't want to expect a container coming from the other side of the globe.
I can say yes. I think we're all very much aware of the recent plans and intentions of the Commission to actually relaunch an industrial plan for Europe. I think the awareness and the challenges we've seen lately as regards the tightness of the supply chains are a direct bottleneck and impact to whatever we were planning in DG Energy. So it sort of we need to form alliances that go beyond the usual remit of DG Energy and work together across the whole value chain. Now, thinking about standardization, I think the answer is commonsensical. This definitely helps, but as far as I'm concerned, it just doesn't come out of the blue, right? You first collect experience from the market, the best solutions, and the market is the best place to actually to form this database of standards and harmonization. And then, of course, the regulation will follow. And I know this sometimes upsets people, but once there's clear standards and obvious benefits to the businesses, then there's the benefits that we can reflect in regulation. It's an obvious thing to then implement these changes, to then have less risk premiums. Then it's more certainty to regulators to look at certain costs that have been sort of associated to investments that are harmonized and types of investments that are harmonized and standardized. So it's a process. It's not something that you can do overnight. So that's why I think you're very much, as always, ambitious, Antonella. You want things to happen immediately, and I think this push is very much needed from the industry towards the policymakers and the regulators. But there's a bit of a learning that needs to happen before we come forward with something.
So, pushy, yes, of course, because time is the only thing we don't really have. Cosimo, we come to you now because, of course, if there is this intention to foster industrialization in Europe, but also in view of the climate change threat that we are experiencing, what do you think it is really necessary, and how do we make all of this sustainable? Because sustainable in the broad sense, not just sustainable infrastructure, but sustainable in the system.
As an adaptation effort.
As an adaptation effort.
Thank you, Antonella, and thank you especially to RGI-ENTSO-E for inviting me here. Thank you also to all the other panelists. It's very interesting for me to be here, and I represent an NGO perspective. So maybe I'm kind of the black sheep in this nice panel. But no, to go back to what you were saying, of course, the sustainability must be ensured on an effort, on a comprehensive sort of plan level. What was said at some point during this morning panel discussion was something simple but very, very true, I think, so that adaptation and mitigations are actually the two faces of the same coin. So wherever, and it's highly important that we integrate adaptation towards grid resilience in our planning, in our grid planning effort, but with every adaptation measure or project that we can implement, there's also the chance to integrate mitigation. There's the chance to look at how these projects can solve a resilience problem, but maybe they can also help to solve, or let's say improve, the health of the ecosystem and the biodiversity where they insist.
So Cosimo, maybe I have to come in, because I think it's very important to mention that whenever we build energy infrastructure, if we are aware of the environment that we have around and how this environment is going to be impacted by climate change impacts, actually we can plan for a better infrastructure, but also for more resilient ecosystem that host that infrastructure. So here we bring together the resilience and the adaptation in one as a win-win situation. And I would like to ask these two gentlemen from the system whether you have been thinking about this.
I mean, I'll jump directly on that because vegetational management, we call it biotope management, has been key of our work, of our power lines. And by good design, you reduce the risk of fire significantly, and thus it really makes the whole environment more resilient. So you have to do less measures because the environment in which you work is more sustainable. And I think this is one of the key issues to achieve that.
Okay. Yeah. So I can only agree to Gerald. So nearly everything Gerald said is valid for the distribution system as well. Maybe in another scale, but we also do ecological corridor management. Of course, we have some. Maybe a little bit shifted emphasis, because, as you know, in distribution systems, due to the lower voltages, we can do more cabling. We can do cheaper and faster cabling. What we do, because cables are very resilient from what we learned from the past to, for example, wildfires, but also to flooding. Cables are really a must there. I already shown you examples. If you remember the map I had in my presentation, that we've chosen the right locations for our secondary substations in an area. It's of course a lot of work you have to do here, because that's individual decisions. So you really have to have trained engineers who then decide for each and every secondary substation, not only how is the load situation, how is the in-feed situation, what we usually do in our day-to-day business, but for those highly affected areas also, what is the situation in my example for flooding? Where does these water streams come down during very intensive rains, for example? Is that really the right location there? And then you might decide to move it a little bit away to make it more resilient.
I need to bring Alessia in now, because you, Michael, are talking about some very localized phenomenon. But climate science actually is looking at a big pattern, and it's not generally telling you exactly in which dot you will have problems. So how can we use climate models, even regional climate models, to further support energy system planning at the level or at the scale that it is meaningful for the infrastructure? Alessia, I'm not sure whether I'm putting you in an uncomfortable position, but please try to answer this question.
Yes, it's slightly because I'm not as such a climate modeler, but I try to work together with climate modelers in order to make best use of their knowledge. And to my understanding, there is more and more the attempt also in climate modeling either to include, for example, also in models which do have geographical specific allocation, to use the insights as much as possible. So my understanding is that all these, there are obviously the big climate models which try to understand what happens in worldwide trends, but more and more there is the attempt to transfer all this to the grid structure in order to be able to understand really what will be happening at NUTS 2 or 10 by 10 kilometer groups, etc. Obviously, doing this for 2050 is not fully meaningful, but what we try to do, I mean, what other people I understand are trying to do, and where we try and take their results from it, is really through the big advances which exist and the big data sets which exist, use artificial intelligence in order to try and understand what this will all mean also at a local level.
Thank you very much. So before we take some of the questions on the Slido, I need to go back to the components, because you build infrastructure today, or you have built it in the past. It has to stand. In case of an event, you need to replace it. Do you know exactly what type of components you have where, or it's a kind of a blind box? How do we increase this knowledge of what type of infrastructure, what type of materials you have and you will continue to have in the past, in the future? Sorry.
You want to start on? I do. I mean, as a transmission system operator, if you look at the lattice towers that we have, the nice towers, we know every piece of steel we know by name. We have it in our database, so we have everything in our databases, and it's really not so much worrying me. What do we have? I think what worries me is that we have a zoo of material over the decades, and we have to make it resilient. And because even if we expand a lot, if we add 1 or 2% of grid per year, it still means a long time until the whole grid is exchanged and we actually have everything standardized. And if I made a little request to policymakers, have a stronger focus on refurbishments to give us the opportunity to redo the older equipment, to bring it to a higher standard, and there's very little incentive in that direction, and some incentive in that direction would help. And Joanna, you used the word risk culture, risk-based, and that I would really support. Not everywhere, but really risk-based. Look at this, maybe even with a harmonized view. There's also the question: do we have resilience standards? I think resilience standards we do not have as such. We have a common approach in many areas with standardization, but going more into a risk-based approach for existing assets to give incentives to redo them, that would be very helpful.
Michael, do you want to add anything, or you know exactly all the components that you have?
Yeah, so I can also only agree to Gerald once again. So everything which is over the surface is quite, we're quite sure we know what there is, because we look at it regularly for maintenance reasons, for example. So our operational staff, my colleagues, at the technological departments are very well aware of what is there, because they maintain it and just do their regular work out there. It might be a little bit different for the last meter of a low voltage line, maybe in a densely populated area, even more so when it is older. But I'm quite sure that we know what is down there in the ground. And even if we do not know, it's not that critical. So that's not the main challenge from my point of view. So you do not have to exactly know what's down in there, as long as it is unproblematic. But I'm fully with Gerald again. We have to, we need a little bit more incentives to renew our systems and to adapt to climate change, but also to the energy transition. So we would do both in one step, of course, to reinforce our system, even parts of it. So depending on how large this part is, it might be that it is not calculated as invest, but it is regular maintenance, which then is not as much incentivized as invest. So that would help us from a policy point of view there. And then maybe what we have also touched upon is that we would that we smartify our systems, as we call it. So we install sensors and to a certain extent also actors in our MV systems, at least there. And these are elements which needs to be renewed more often than conventional distribution system elements. So if there is a cable, it will be good for decades, where if there is electronics, you might have it for 8 to 10 years, and then you have to renew it completely. And that's a challenge with regard to standardization, because if you look at a computer which is now 8 years old, it's fallen out of time. So you have to renew it, and it's a challenge for standardization, because you would have to renew your whole amount of assets in a very short cycle here.
Very good. So we are talking about information technologies and monitoring technologies that obviously need to be deployed to complement the hardware of the energy system. We have a question about other pieces of hardware, which is related to battery systems, which of course they will increase resilience of the system as well as flexibility. And I would say they are also subject to impacts of extreme weather events. So when you plan your system, are you also taking into account the other components beyond electricity grids? And do you also consider how extreme weather events may impact the generation side? Because obviously, the grid is going to be affected as well.
Would you like? for power plants?
As a matter of fact, we always take into account first the grid. If we have an extreme weather event coming up, we change our internal reliability assessment. So we look that we have more, I'd call it reserves. We look at the power plants. We also tell power plants to be in operation mode in case something happens. And we also assess all the generation that's coming up, because, for example, in storm, you could have a severe drop in wind generation because at a certain storm level they are cut off. And all those things are considered in our models then, and they are put today for tomorrow in our operational mode, and we take a lot of care, and we are actually in close contact. I mean, we are working the same area. I know that our control rooms there, and if something comes up, are in direct contact. We are in direct contact with the control rooms of all generators. That is very close. I would just like to state a point that worries me here. We have now tons of small PV coming up in our system, and there's no control whatsoever, and we don't necessarily know how they behave. And this also poses a risk that is very difficult to deal with. So when you have weather events that change the impact of photovoltaics, we cannot control it. We can only live with that. With wind farms and so on, we can talk to the operator and they can adapt their mode of operation to the system needs. And that is often difficult with lots of very small generation.
Alessia, can any of your work help in this case?
Well, not for, let's say, the day-to-day planning there. I believe ENTSO-E and the TSOs are much better related. But what I would like to add is that the extreme events also affect the demand. Because when we're talking about tropical nights or extreme heat waves, etc., this is also something that we will need to plan for, and especially in a system which is going to be more and more electrified, as has been mentioned. This also needs to go into the planning, obviously, that the load curves will also be significantly changing over time. And this is where I believe we can also, we can help, aside from trying to take into account in the longer term planning, also the changes in the generation driven by the extreme events, etc.
Yeah, that's a very good point. On the demand side, of course, there will be massive changes, but also I would argue that's where most of the opportunity lies, in the demand side. And we are not yet good at understanding and taking these opportunities. Now, Cosimo, you are part, together with the EB and CAN, of the PAC project, Paris Agreement, Compatible Scenarios. This is a collaborative project. Do you think that this discussion on adaptation of energy infrastructure can become one new element of this collaborative effort, and how?
No, I definitely think so. Of course, you mentioned the Paris Agreement compatible scenario. In a sense, I think is a scenario that even more reliant on grid resilience and adaptation because of the very swift penetration of direct electrification in our end uses, and of course of the limited role therein for other power sources and the non-existing role of carbon sequestration. Of carbon capture and storage. So it's even more reliant on grid planning for a resilient infrastructure. I think, though, the question should be brought on the next phase of the scenario in a very comprehensive way. I think that the PAC scenario work brings the EEB, brings RGI, CAN Europe, and REN 21 in a privileged position to understand what are the constraints that can be solved with comprehensive strategies and solution. I was mentioning, of course, the need to integrate, or the opportunity to integrate climate mitigation, because of course healthier ecosystems also means hopefully less climate pressure. But also I think what the work in the PAC scenario has been doing, and RGI has been at the forefront of it, is how do we involve NGOs and the public in the planning processes. And this is surely an element that we'll need to tackle. Let's say how to develop legal or extra legal platform for dialogues that bring together TSOs, DSOs, policymakers, and NGOs, because I think the NGOs and possibly a wide array of policymakers needs more information, need to understand and grasp the technicalities behind it, but also the sort of what our input can be is a deep knowledge on the territory on what a project should insist, and from policymakers even the capacity, maybe the regional authorities can be the aggregators for local authorities and so on, and DSOs and so on. So participatory practices and the nature positive character of grids infrastructure adaptation should be key in the continuation of that work.
Well, I would like to add that actually engagement with the public is going to become more and more necessary when we will see more of these extreme impacts occurring, because the demand needs to be informed and somehow be ready to react and not just to leave the damage or support whatever happens. So there could be more dynamic reaction from the demand side as well. I would like to keep one of the questions that appears on the Slido, which is about how there is an emphasis on TSOs today. I think there has been an emphasis for a long time. It is changing. There is a realization actually that the DSOs level is essential to the energy transition, because a lot of the new installations are connected to the DSOs and not to the TSOs. So how are the DSOs involved in a resilience and adaptation plans for Europe? Is there a collaborative effort between ENTSO-E and the European DSOs agency, ETSO, and is there also an intention of the Commission? I come to you, Anna, in a moment, but first I would like to hear from Michael whether you are part of European plans for resilience and adaptation.
Yes, so I can tell you. So I'm not personally, because I'm not every day in Brussels. But yes, even before the European DSO entity has been founded, there has been a strong collaboration between TSOs, between ENTSO-E and the DSOs represented by the former associations or still existing associations back then. So we already engaged in scenario building, and we of course also handed in our input to the 10-year network development plan, for example. So there is close collaboration on the one hand on the European level, of course, and on the other hand even more so on the national level, where at least I can tell you from the German situation, the process we have on European level is more or less mirrored and maybe repeated again on the national level, but of course with a different granularity. And of course we have a strong and close collaboration there with our TSOs to exchange our views on what do we expect with regard to renewables in feed, what do we expect with regard to the demand in our supply areas, and what can we jointly do to build the interconnected system to make it more resilient and to retrofit it to cope with the increased demand and the increased feed-in.
So, Oana, thanks a lot, Michael. Oana, you know that the Commission has been instrumental in pushing ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G to do joint planning, joint infrastructure planning. And of course, now there is also an increasing interest to bring the DSOs closer into this planning process. Do you have plans to actually kind of force TSOs and DSOs to work together more closely than ever in the past?
Thanks for this $1 million question, Antonella. I wanted to first So before I answer, I wanted to first say something that I've heard from all my fellow panelists, is that mitigation efforts contribute to adaptation. So if you've got infrastructure that is able to recover swiftly, so to help the recovery, then this is already half a step towards having what we like to call a resilient system. And this is what we did when we revised the TENI regulation. The whole idea was to insist on optimizing infrastructure, so to look at it from a smart energy system kind of integration angle, and have this kind of sector coupling built in, and have more smart electricity grids, with the idea that a more digitalized grid would be a more responsive one. So this is already something I wanted to underline. And this is where I get to the role of DSOs, which is more and more significant in the new TENI regulation, and is something that has been, let's say, desired by both the TSO and the DSO community, by stakeholders. So I remember during the consultations and the impact assessment, the idea of strengthening the interface between TSO and DSO has been very much put forward and justified, and this has been the desire of the co-legislators as well, with the background and in the back of our head having a more kind of integrated and coupled way of planning. Now, from here to being prescriptive, again, what we did and what we have now in the provisions is that we're giving the DSOs entities a more prominent role in the planning. So they're present in the, like I mentioned before, the regional group regional group meetings, which are the formats in which we discuss all the elements pertaining to the selection of projects of common interest. Also because many DSOs in Europe are promoters of smart electricity grids projects, or play an increasing role in the way we manage electricity grids. So already them being present and contributing to the discussion in the regional groups is an addition to something that was mentioned before by Michael, that there's an increased role in the upstream part of the PCI process, therefore in the TYNDP. So we're now in the phase where we're involving the DSOs and their newly created entities, because it's true that it was a bit difficult given the granularity and the different organizations and planning habits and methods at the national level to actually look at it from a single kind of a single lens, the way we look at the way ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G is organized. But I think we're halfway there, and we're, aside the TENI regulation and these provisions, we're very much using the soft tools I mentioned before. So we bring this, the need to increase and strengthen the DSO interface and cooperation in all the possible kind of platforms, the way, I mean, like the Energy Infrastructure Forum we have annually in Copenhagen that has discussed and sort of operationalized ways on how to increase this cooperation. And like I said, it stays for the moment at the kind of the voluntary level. We have the best practices, so we have many TSOs that cooperate very well with the DSOs at national level, and we're trying to mainstream this in other regions in Europe, but without, you know, being too strong on it, because it's very difficult to really reach a conclusion that one size fits all. But maybe we're getting there. So
thank you very much, Anna. And I really need to pick one of the questions that is out there in the Slido, because it is about hydrogen and methane, whether hydrogen and methane can improve the resilience of the power system. Of course, I will ask the panelists to answer, but I need to say that we are talking about physical impacts on energy infrastructure and not on system operation, although they are strictly connected to each other. But whenever we have a physical impact on energy infrastructure, it means all the infrastructure can be impacted and not just one part of the infrastructure. So I have to ask to the engineers to answer this question. Will different carriers increase the resilience of the system?
Let me put it a little bit differently. I think everything, we will have a very flexible system because we have renewables being weather dependent. So we need the load, our customers, to also react on this. And then we also need electrolyzers who can be operated in a supporting way. And everything needs to be connected and needs to be supporting each other. And also there was the question with batteries. For example, we have with E.ON, his mother company, we have a project where we say if a power line trips, that batteries take immediately over. That is an interaction, so within milliseconds. So it's hardwired, and the power line trips and batteries take over. This is how things can interact and really make the whole system more resilient. So if something goes wrong, another system picks it up. And if we design the whole system together, then those elements can really help. If you just put an electrolyzer someplace where it doesn't help and just operates the way you want, then it won't work. If you do it together, then it can have an impact.
Alessia, do you have something to say about this?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, how we plan to include how it is included in the modeling is obviously that they will be providing storage, but will have to absolutely operate flexibly to the extent possible in order to provide all the benefits. Because indeed, as just mentioned, if they just are an additional load to the system, then they won't bring any benefits. In general terms, obviously, they will be providing, from an energy system perspective, they will be providing a secondary type of energy carrier, which should, at some point in time, be as much as possible carbon neutral. So in that sense, it can allow for other elements of the system to operate, such as industry and other elements. But this is going beyond, let's say, the infrastructure, the discussion of today, but rather to the entire energy system planning.
Michael, do you want to add something on this? Or Cosimo?
Yeah, maybe besides the systemic perspective, which is of course absolutely true, let me add for the example I've given you from the incident in the R area. So we had a gas supply system for natural gas there as well, and it was severely hit by the incident. So we did not only lose the electricity system, but at the same time also the gas supply system as well. And that is then of course an additional challenge, because you quickly rebuild the electricity system, the power system, of course, because you need to resupply customers with electricity as quickly as possible. So many aspects of our lives are depending on electricity, and you are less or not as quick as you are with electricity with the natural gas system. It needs more planning. It, of course, needs a lot more of building efforts, and that was really a challenge during the first winter. So it was already a challenge just after the event, because if you have a house down there and it was affected by a flood, then you would like to dry it up, which you would need a lot of electricity for, or electrical energy for. And then during the winter, the easiest way to heat up your home is, of course, using electricity. You just use a heater you can get everywhere. And that is an additional challenge for the electricity system. Or in other terms, if we just turn it around, yes, energy carriers like hydrogen or natural gas, as we know it from today and from the past, can play a role to improve the resilience of the power system by decreasing the load of the power system. So we have to also carefully evaluate for the future where hydrogen can play a role to maybe relieve the load we have on the electricity system.
So I need to intervene here, because I fully agree, provided that we take a very strong standing that the demand can, should play a very important role in reducing, shifting the load. Cosimo, I think
I would really like to jump in.
Yes,
if you allow me.
please.
I'll try to be brief. No, but surely, and let's say I cannot allow myself some sort of technical considerations that are not, let's say, in my background, or not the core focus of my job, although I try to incorporate as much as possible the scientific knowledge in what we do. But I think looking at it from again, from an energy system perspective, appealing character of hydrogen, and well, to a lesser extent methane, because we use it already, in terms of balancing, in terms of power generation, it's, I don't know, it's something that I don't see very positively, in a sense that it's supportive of an energy consumption model and a society more in general that's very wasteful, and that will have to undergo some changes. So probably the need that we can reasonably see today from a technical point of view of massive quantities of hydrogen for the energy system, for the power system, are hopefully not that high. Again, there are uses that are indispensable, heavy industry and so, and there are uses that are, in our view, it's indispensable to avoid, such as domestic heating and so on the power system.
You know, the counter has already reached the zero, and I need to close this panel. I want to thank all of you, really, for this lively conversation. And I'm sorry we ended up talking about hydrogen again. But really, whenever we plan infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and we talk about climate change, extreme events, these are going to affect everything. Every single infrastructure, every single standing thing out there. And so we really need to have an holistic approach and see how do we combine the different components in an optimal way and in an efficient way. So thanks a lot to my panelists, and I would like to invite Sonya to do the closing of this session. Hi.
Hi, Antonella.
So here we are, and we have reached the end of our conference. I hope you have enjoyed it and you have learned new things. I definitely have. And for me, the key points that I would like to summarize is that first of all, we are at the beginning of a long journey in understanding the topics, in understanding how do we bring the different actors together to get really a system planning that is comprehensive and this is coherent with the challenges that we face ahead of us. The other thing is that we have new technologies that are going to be deployed, smart technologies. We need standardization as much as possible. We need sharing best practices, and we need data. Because without data, all of it will not be possible. Sharing data, therefore, becomes important across communities, and I really hope that ENTSO-E will continue to do work with the transparency platform to really put data available. And of course, we have a lot of climate data from the climate community coming up, and finding ways to bring these two communities together is what is really needed. We have also heard that a lot of the mitigation measures that we need to put in place are not simply related to the generation side, but also on the demand side. So we need to understand better how do we reflect this into the strategic planning that needs to take place to reduce the risks of impacts at a later stage. So, Sonya, I really want to thank you for having us again in your home, in your house. Yeah. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it as much as me.
Yes, of course. So, of course, on behalf of both of us, Antonella, I'd like to thank all the speakers for their excellent and thought-provoking talks and contributions to our discussions today. Thank you to you all. Most importantly, I'd like to thank the audience here online for your input and your questions and your valuable contributions and engagement. I'm happy to see that the insightful discussions identify key elements which we all need to consider now in terms terms of taking forward to build robust and resilient energy systems that are renewables based. Of course, will help us understand what actions we need to take when we adjust to the realities of climate change and when building infrastructure now and in the future. When it comes to network planning, we need to be aware of these climatic conditions so that the system needs are properly identified. This aspect is valid for both demand side, as electricity is load temperature dependent, but also as we move from supply side with patterns for wind and solar to change due to climate across Europe. Of course, there are questions that are remaining unanswered here today, and that is something that we can all work on in the future, but the outcome is very clear. We need an increased level of cooperation between us all, and we need to ensure that we handle these incidents of climate more resilient and more robust in the future, applying best practices and preventing the impact to us all going forward. I look forward to our future cooperation and collaboration together. And of course, today I want to just say that it's only the start of our future collaboration. Thank you to you all, and I wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you.
And Sonya, shall we thank the teams that have made this possible? Yeah, there is always a huge amount of work that is put in organizing a conference. And we stand here, but there are so many people that stand behind us. So thanks to all of those that have worked for this to happen. And happy to reconvene soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.